YouTube.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on. Setting up for webinar for YouTube Live. All right, you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Scanlon. I'm the House Chair of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to the February 15th public hearing. I'm sorry, February 16th public hearing of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, our first public hearing of the 2021 session. As always, I want to make a few reminders at the top for both the members and those who are testifying today on the one bill we have before us. The hearing is going to be conducted at a slower pace to accommodate the quality of the live stream. Just if you're not used to the pace we're going in, that's the reason why we're doing it. All participants must be muted until they are invited to speak, and you will be muted until you're invited to speak. Any disruptive or inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated and will result in expulsion from the meeting. People who are ejected from the meeting will not be readmitted. If you are a member and want to ask a question of one of the people who are testifying, raise their virtual hand to signify a desire to speak, and I will call on you in the order in which, to the best of my perceptive abilities, that you raised your hand and you can ask your question. If there's a computer or mobile device, open the participant pane and click raised hand at the bottom of the panel. If you're on the phone, you do *6 to toggle mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, we have 53 folks signed up to testify today, or 52 rather. The first one is Harold Brooks, followed by Randy Collins from CCM. And Mr. Administrator, if you're ready to go, please bring Mr. Brooks into the conversation.
And Mr. Brooks is right now not available. The first speaker on the list is Patricia Wallace that is available to speak at this point.
Okay, down to 49 then. Ms. Wallace, please proceed.
Thank you. I am Patricia Wallace. I own a home at 64 through 70 Edgewood Avenue in the Dwight neighborhood of New Haven. I'm a retired social worker. 20 years ago, I staffed a statewide effort called the Center Ridge Project, sponsored by the Social Justice Office of the Archdiocese of Hartford. Many organizations co-sponsored it. Public education events were held in 69 cities and towns in Connecticut, along with a great variety of other publication initiatives. The goal was to have a conversation about the state's tax policies and the impact of those policies on school sprawling development and the long history of economic and racial injustice in our state. Until the state is prepared to take on the over-reliance on the property tax, Pilot is a vital corrective. However, Pilot has not been funded at the level that would provide the help intended by those that crafted it. Senate Bill 00873 would assist New Haven and other cities in return for the services and jobs that are provided to the people of our region. Think about what our state would be like without the vitality of cities at the heart of our regions. I urge your support for this bill as a common sense measure to support the communities that are home to the hospitals, universities, social service, and arts institutions that benefit everyone. I would also ask for support for the provision that would do away with the liens that can be placed on those that receive public assistance. We have come a long way since the days of consigning people without the funds or the capacity to fully support themselves to the local poor farm, but we have further to go. I worked as a consultant to the Corporation for Supportive Housing to assist people in some of Connecticut's small towns to devise strategies so that local people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness could be housed and given needed support services in their own communities. Every community has and will always have people that need our help. Liens are punitive. We can afford as a society to give help to those that need it. We need to focus instead on addressing the root causes of poverty and on a tax system that should ask more of those with the ability to pay, not those that are on the edge. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wallace, for your testimony this morning. I neglected to mention that for those of you who are testifying today that have been down this path before, we are still adhering to the 3-minute rule, and folks can ask questions beyond that. We're going to try to limit those to make sure that we can get through everybody today in this difficult format. But thank you, Ms. Wallace, for that testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your time. And we will move on to Audrey Downey and Alex Tobbs, assuming that Mr. Brooks and Mr. Collins have not arrived yet.
And the next one on the list would be Mr. Tobbs.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak, and for everyone on the committee for listening. I'm here to speak today in support of the portions of Raised Bill 873 concerning the removal of liens on the property of public assistance beneficiaries. I'm also a supporter of the pilot provisions that are also in this bill, but I'm a civil rights lawyer in New Haven, and my experience is with dealing with these welfare liens and how it really becomes an access to justice issue for people who have previously relied upon public assistance, because the existence of these liens, this lifelong welfare debt that follows people who ever use any kind of public assistance in Connecticut, it's an albatross that makes any potential lawsuit that would ever involve those people, whether they get injured or discriminated against or otherwise harmed and need to go to the court, it makes that lawsuit more complicated, more costly, less likely to settle. And therefore, lawyers know in Connecticut that people who have less means, who may or who have relied on welfare at some time in their lives, are less likely to be able to get justice, and they don't take their cases. And that means that people who ever use welfare don't get the same equal protection of the laws that they are entitled to. And so it's time to abolish this practice, like 48 other states that have done so. I understand that there is provisions in this bill that have watered it down so that there still would be welfare liens. Those need to be changed so that we only collect these liens to the extent that they are required to be collected by very harsh federal laws that hopefully will change. But the state of Connecticut should join the vast majority of states that no longer collects this welfare debt on its own initiative for life. And even after death of people who have used welfare. Welfare should be a hand up and promote independence and not lifelong debt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tobbs. Do you have any idea off the top of your head, Mr. Tobbs, how many other states do not do this?
Essentially, we do know that the only other state that practices this kind of debt collection on a mass basis of people who have used welfare is New York. All of the other states have abolished it, and they've abolished it now for, in most cases, 40 or 50 years.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Tobbs.
Thank you.
Mr. Brooks is available to speak next.
All right,
Mr.
we'll
Brooks
have
will be-
Mr. Brooks followed by Mr. Collins if he appears, and then Audrey Downey. Do we have Mr. Brooks?
Yes,
Mr. Brooks, you may be muted. If you could just state your name and where you're from for the record, that'd be great.
my name is Harold Brooks. I'm from the city of New Haven. I'm the union president for Local 3144. Good morning, Chairman Fonvera and Chairman Scallion and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Harold Brooks, and I'm the president of ASME, Council for Local 3144, which is comprised of management professionals who work for the city of New Haven. I'm here to testify in strong support of Senate Bill 873, an act mitigating adverse tax consequences resulting from employees working remotely during COVID-19 and concerning the removal of liens on the property of public assistance and beneficiaries and a 3-tier grant in lieu of taxes program. The city of New Haven has over 50% of its taxable land exempt from property taxes, which results in the city losing large amounts of revenue every city cycle. New Haven and many other municipalities are trapped, relying on regressive property taxes and pilot funding from the state. And I just want you to know New Haven suffers greatly with the intergenerational poverty rates here in New Haven. And due to the large amount of tax exempt property, it means becoming even more dependent on pilot funding to help alleviate costs and provide services to the people of New Haven. However, the state has never fully funded its pilot programs, payments to the city of New Haven, or to other municipalities in similar situations. This results in either higher property tax than residents can reasonably handle, cuts in the budget, and reductions in services that disproportionately impact communities of color. The underfunding of pilot communities to exacerbate the inequalities in our communities and need to be addressed in this budget cycle. This bill would begin to bring equity to the pilot payments so communities that need the funding the most are able to receive it. This bill creates a 3-tier structure to equalize payment across the state. Tier 1 would be communities like New Haven, as well as smaller towns throughout the state, while tiers 2 and 3 would receive less reimbursement from the state. This structure would correct an injustice that has existed for years and in helping bring greater equity among communities. COVID-19 showed just how large the inequity between communities of color and ones that receive a disproportionate amount of pilot funding. I want to thank Senator Looney for proposing this bill and the committee for holding this hearing today. I urge the committee to pass this bill forward and to move it forward so the larger group can vote on it, so that communities like New Haven can receive the funding that they have deserved for decades. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here with us today, Mr. Brooks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, next on deck, we have Mr. Pesco Salido, followed by Ms. Abigail Roth.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Jeffrey Pesco. I am the Director of New Haven's Parks and Public Works. I've had the pleasure of serving the residents of New Haven for 24 years. During that time period, the Departments of Parks and Public Works has experienced a number of cuts, services, and staff. Prior to 2001, Parks maintained 75 employees. Public Works maintained 165 employees. State funding cuts in 2001, recession cuts in 2003, and 2008, that all translated in cut to staffing, personnel providing services to the New Haven residents. Last year, in an effort to maintain efficiency, New Haven's Parks and Public Works providing services, the city merged Department of Parks and Public Works so we could maintain these services at a staff level of 150 employees. The New Haven residents require these services. We do the recycling collection. We maintain the city departments of Public Works maintain 231 miles of roadway. Parks maintain 145 parks and 66 playgrounds. And to mention, we have 470 miles of sidewalks that we must maintain. This funding is critical to the city of New Haven. This bill would provide resources for the municipality like New Haven. While we don't anticipating able to restore positions, the funding will protect the city and New Haven for our future cuts. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to speak and ask questions. I'd be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for being here this morning. Any questions from the committee? If not, thank you again, and we'll move on to Alder Roth.
Thank you, co-chairs, vice chairs, ranking members, and other members of this committee for holding this hearing today and considering my remarks. My name's Abigail Roth, and I live in New Haven, Connecticut. I strongly support Senate Bill 873 and the creation and funding of a need-based tiered pilot system. I serve on the New Haven Board of Alders, representing thousands of taxpayers and other residents and businesses depending on city services. On March 1st, Mayor Elicker will submit his proposed budget to the board, and it's projected to have a $66 million deficit. A central reason for this is that in New Haven, almost 60% of our property is not taxable, in large part because Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital are major property owners in the city, which has created a significant structural deficit. As you all know well, Pilot was established to make up for the revenue Connecticut cities and towns lost out on because of non-taxable property. These payments are so critical because in Connecticut, unlike many other states, over 85% of our local services like schools, police, and fire are funded by local property taxes. However, as you also know, we have substantially underfunded Pilot for years. It simply isn't possible or sustainable to fund city operations and long-term structural costs such as pensions and debt service when only 40% of New Haven's property is taxable. Unless something changes, such as this bill being passed, I'm going to have to vote to raise our already high property taxes significantly to an amount that many residents and businesses simply can't afford and risk driving people and businesses out of the city, or to dramatically cut city services that are already stretched very thin and that are vital to the health, safety, and education of our residents, and that impact many who do not live in our city, or most likely a combination of these two bad choices. A poor alternative would be underfunding fixed costs such as pensions and debt service that make up a significant percentage of our budget, which would have cascading negative effects over time. If a federal stimulus bill to provide money to state and local government passes, that would be very helpful in the short term as we respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. It would be a one-time fix that would not address the structural problem of having almost 60% of our property non-taxable. While I greatly worry about New Haven, the reality is in a small state like Connecticut, New Haven and other cities are critical economic drivers. If New Haven and other cities suffer economically, it will harm the entire state. And if our cities thrive, it will greatly benefit the entire state. This bill offers a sensible bipartisan approach to address this problem in which no municipality receives less pilot funding than it currently does. It also recognizes the challenges the state faces economically by targeting increased funding to municipalities most in need. Even for those municipalities most in need, they will only receive 50% of funding, again, recognizing the financial constraints on the state. Yet this additional funding will make a critical difference in the lives of taxpayers and other residents and businesses in New Haven and other Tier 1 and Tier 2 towns, which will strengthen the entire state. Again, I urge you to support this bill. Thank you so much for listening to and considering my testimony.
Thank you, Alder. Good to see you. Thank you for being here with us today. And Representative Cheeseman has a question for you.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alder Roth, for being here. So could you tell me how this new funding structure would change the amount you're receiving? I mean, what's the delta here? How much more money would New Haven receive as a result?
I mean, it is, I've been told as projected, we would receive like $50 million more.
Okay, and can you, I know New Haven is facing particular challenges, hearing from Mayor Elicker, in terms of your longer term fiscal sustainability. Can you give me some example of how this would play out, what you would be able to do? I just want to see in the real world what this would mean to the city of New Haven.
Sure, I mean, I think there's, I look at our budget as two parts, sort of the sort of elements like pensions. We were just given a report told that we should be based on sort of assumptions that we really should be putting $25 million more into our pension funds than we currently are in the upcoming year. And so, I mean, there is no way we can do that right now. If you look at all of our services, our police, our fire, we are, I mean, there's really very little to cut. We've already sort of cut to the bone, and our schools, we don't have, they're short on supplies. Our police people are needing, police and fire to respond to things. We really are quite bare boned. And so there's just not, in the operational budget, nothing to cut because of sort of the healthcare pension and debt service just make up such a big portion of our budget.
So a large number of those legacy costs that we see really take a toll on all budgets, including our own state budget.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions for Alder Roth? Seeing none, Alder, thank you for being here with us today.
The next person we would have would be Mayor Pissarro, followed by Jamie Myers McPhail, followed by Mayor Broden.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. Senator Fonfara, Senator Scanlon, members of the committee. I am so pleased to join you today to be able to speak in support of Senate Bill 873. Some of you may recall that I started off my first term 5 years ago, advocating for some form of pilot reform. At the time, the City of New London was financially on the ropes. Our fund balance was depleted to, believe it or not, around $2 million, and the situation was dire. We have been working very hard on our own to remedy that situation. Fast forwards 5 years, and we have a healthy fund balance. We've managed to increase our bond rating, but we are still at an extremely competitive disadvantage to our surrounding communities. I'll just give you one example. We host Yale New Haven L&M Hospital here. The very small tax base in the City of New London, you're looking at somebody who sends out about 8,000 tax bills. That's it, property tax bills. They have to, that small base has to support the complete offset of the property taxes for all of the property that Yale New Haven holds in the City of New London. But that great service, and I'm not advocating that they shouldn't be tax exempt. It's just that the taxpayers in the City of New London should not be sharing that, should not have that burden alone. It should be shared with all of the communities around New London that benefit from this community hospital. You know, it's not just the ambulances in New London that deliver patients to that hospital. So I just want to use that as one, example of the unfairness of this system. And the disproportionate mill rates. You can live, it's a mile away from City Hall in New London, and your mill rate is half of what it is in New London, because you're not carrying the burden of all of the tax exempt properties. We provide all of the social services for this region, but the taxpayers in New London have to bear the cost of the tax exemptions. It would, if to give you an idea of the amount of money we lose every year in property taxes, it's $30 million. We would be able to provide the educational resources for our children in New London, just like the affluent communities in the state can provide those resources for their children if we had that $30 million, for sure. And that is the inequity of the current system. Now, what I love about Senator Looney's proposal and Senate Bill 873 is, for the first time in my 5 years doing this, I believe there's real hope. This presents an opportunity for change to start to, it doesn't solve the problem completely, but it's an amazing step forward for us. And I just would implore this legislature to take this opportunity, albeit without the governor's support, and I'm very disappointed about that, very disappointed. But I think this legislature has to step up and fill that leadership void and do something about the inequities of this current system, because it's crushing the City of New London, quite frankly. And we're working very, very hard at our own self-help methods. We're taking full advantage of this great opportunity we have here with General Dynamics Electric Boat and their contracts, driving our local economy, taking full advantage of that. But we really need your help, and we need you to level the playing field between our city and the other towns that surround us. With that, I will, yield and take any questions. And I really appreciate your time. And I hope I wasn't a little too overpassionate on this issue, but
No, don't apologize, Mayor. I understand, you especially, and a lot of your colleagues, mayors and first selectmen, you're living this every day, and it's only right that you're passionate about it. So please don't apologize for that. Your Senator Formica has a question.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Senator.
Always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
It's good to see
and
you.
hear your passion for the city that you have been so strong about over the years of your term. This bill is got the pilot part in it. I wasn't sure if this bill was coming out to talk about the income tax issues that we were sharing with neighboring states, but now it has the pilot part in it that hasn't totally been fleshed out. And part of that conversation is including a 1 mil tax on properties, residential and commercial properties in the state. Do you feel that that's going to have a detrimental effect on some of the businesses? And you mentioned specifically Electric Boat. Because I agree with you about dealing with the pilot. As a former first selectman with 2 prisons and parks and all of that in East Lyme, we suffered a similar fate, not quite as extensive as yours, but do you feel like there could possibly be an unintended consequence of this?
Trying to fund an initiative like this, the devil's always in the details. However, I think that there's still more equity in that proposal than doing nothing. I mean, you take the proposal for the 3-tiered pilot, and then you have to find the funding mechanism to support it. I think the current proposal, as I understand it, it's for properties over a certain value, significantly high enough that I don't believe that there would be an immediate disadvantage. We do have a number of residential properties in the city that would fall into that. And that market has been very robust in the last year or so during this pandemic. I'm sure you all follow what's going on in the real estate market, especially the higher end real estate market, with an influx of people from neighboring very large cities that are moving into smaller cities. And that's happening in New London. And I thought about your question, and I don't believe there's a significant risk, and certainly the upside for the city would offset any of that. It'd be a great upside to have this bill.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come on and share your passion. And I'm hopeful that you and I be able to get together as this process plays out and the pilot details come out, and we can see if there are any unintended consequences to the city as a result of this proposal. But I agree, it's time to do something because this process has been underfunded for years. But thank you very much, and I hope you're well, and I look forward to speaking with you soon outside of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And if I can, Senator, just to clarify, the proposal of the statewide property tax is not included in the bill that we're hearing today. So it just strictly talks about the pilot. I just want to clarify that for the committee in case that comes up elsewhere in the hearing. Any other questions for Mayor Passarello? If not, Mayor, thank you for your time today, and thank you for testifying.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your work.
Next up, Deb, who do we have?
Up next, we have Jamie Myers McPhail, followed by Mayor Bronin.
Thank you, Christina.
Is Jamie Myers McPhail?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Oh, hey, how are you?
Hi, my name is Jamie Myers McPhail. I'm here to testify in support of SB 873 on behalf of New Haven Rising, a grassroots community organization fighting for racial and economic justice. As part of New Haven Rising, I have seen the human cost of chronic underfunding. Of course, the pandemic has exacerbated the racial and economic inequality in our city, but a lot of that crisis was already present. Last year, our Board of Alders declared racism a public health crisis, recognizing the unequal losses in our Black and Brown communities to COVID-19 and the shortened life expectancies that have plagued these neighborhoods long before the pandemic. While New Haven residents battled unemployment, hunger, and sickness, Yale University announced that its endowment reached a new high of $31 billion. And yet it is New Haven residents providing over tens of millions of dollars in annual financial support to Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital, not the other way around. These two institutions own a combined $4.58 billion of tax-exempt real property in New Haven. This year, the tax exemption for Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital will cost our city $157 million. That's even after voluntary payments and the pilot funding we received are considered. Our city is reaching a breaking point. Every year, our Board of Alders and Mayor are forced to make impossible decisions about funding essential services like libraries, schools, city infrastructure, potholes, while maintaining a reasonable tax burden on our homeowners. Every year, the Yale tax break grows larger and larger. Not only has the state pilot payment not increased at the same rate, it has actually decreased by $4.8 million in the last 5 years. In the same time frame, the Yale tax break increased by $72 million. So as this gap widens, ordinary New Haven residents are paying the price. Since last year, our organization and many others around the city and state have called on Yale University, Yale New Haven Hospital to increase their voluntary payments to New Haven. But as we continue to fight for that, we also applaud this effort by the state to offer a more equitable solution to pilot funding. This bill would be a huge step in rectifying the unsustainable tax breaks that New Haven must face every year, and other cities as well. And with more equitable funding, our city can invest in its children and its families and end the decades-long legacy of segregated development and systemic racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers-McPhail. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Oh, shoot. Yes.
Okay, Representative Wood, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, getting off mute. And I do have a question. And thank you for your testimony. You mentioned something about New Haven can't sustain these unsustainable tax breaks. What did you mean by that? I'm unclear.
Well, our city has, been giving a tax break. Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital. Of course, every nonprofit is non-taxed.
Right.
But as those institutions have grown and gobbled up a greater and greater percentage of our city, we can't put together a budget if we can't collect taxes. Unfortunately, that's how the system works. Schools budgets are based on taxes. So what that amounts to basically a tax break. And as I said, that is costing us $157 million just last year alone, even after the voluntary payment and the pilot. So we're not getting reimbursed. So basically, we're
right. Okay. Thank you very much for that clarity. That now I understand that. I just wanted to understand the context more because I think to the heart of your issue, and you covered a lot of territory with that. Some of it philosophical, your philosophical view on things. I think most of us support fully funding pilot and we'll be looking at ways to do that. So thank you for your testimony and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you again, Mr. McMyers-McPhail. Next up, I believe we have Mayor Bronin from the City of Hartford.
Thanks very much, Chairman Scanlon, Chairman Fonfara, Senator Martin, and Representative Cheeseman, and all the members of the committee. Very much appreciate the chance to testify this morning. And I'm testifying both in my capacity as mayor of the city of Hartford and as president of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. And as you all know, CCM is the organization representing Connecticut municipalities of all sizes, led by Democrats and Republicans alike. And CCM stands in strong support of SB 873. And I also want to express our gratitude to Senator Looney for his championing of this legislation. As a number of speakers have talked about this morning, the legislation for you represents an important step forward toward funding more fully the pilot program that has been dramatically underfunded over the years. As you know, many communities in our state have a very high percentage of property that is tax exempt. And in a state where property tax is the only meaningful source of locally generated revenue, that can lead to enormous structural problems, structural fiscal challenges that also lead to enormous disparities. It's also the case that many of the communities that are host to the largest amounts of non-taxable property are the communities that are also in many ways the highest need, with the highest levels of poverty, the lowest levels of median household income, lowest levels of home ownership. And as a result, those communities that have the largest part of their tax base non-taxable are required to raise their mill rate to unsustainably high levels and impose an unsustainable and deeply unfair burden on those who are least able to pay, and disincentivize investment in communities that are most in need of that investment. It gives me a great pleasure to say that CCM representing does a wide variety of communities, diverse communities of all sizes, stands in united support, because the members of CCM recognize that in this small state, 169 towns, but 3.5 million people, the fate of all of our communities are tied to the success of every community. And it's important that we allow our communities to be successful. I also want to stress that while this bill makes progress in more fully funding the pilot formula, this bill would not represent the full funding of the existing pilot formula. And CCM will continue to advocate for full funding of the long-standing pilot formula that's been on the books. That said, we recognize the opportunity to make progress and stand in full support of it. I also, in my personal capacity, will be submitting written testimony both on this aspect of the bill, as well as the aspect of the bill that would eliminate liens on real property for recipients of certain types of public assistance. And in my personal capacity, strongly urge the committee to support that element of this bill as well. It is important that we not penalize residents in our state who have been able to be successful, to build wealth by pulling them back into the trap of poverty, when our collective goal should be to support their success. So I'd be glad to have the chance to talk about either aspect of the bill, but strongly urge the committee to support this bill in whole.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for pointing out that this is something that CCM supports, and that there's broad support for this among the different CEOs that you all are representative of. I know that my first selectman in Guilford will be testifying a little later today in support of this. And as somebody who represents a New Haven suburb, I think you hit it right on the head when you said that the success of these cities is really the success of all of us in Connecticut. If New Haven is not healthy and prospering, cities and towns like the ones that I represent in the suburbs of New Haven won't be able to do that either. So I appreciate you making that point.
Thanks, Representative. May I make one point on that? I do think it's important also to recognize that while our cities stand to benefit because they are host to enormous amounts of non-taxable property, which provides services to the region around, it's also worth noting that cities are not the only beneficiaries of this. There are many communities that are not large urban centers that do have large amounts of non-taxable property that would benefit as well.
Thank you. Representative Staffstrom, followed by Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mayor, good to see you. Thanks as always for being with us, and certainly for your staunch advocacy on behalf of all the cities in our state and fair and equitable funding being sent to them. I guess I should probably know this question. I don't know whether you're the person to answer it or not, but one of the questions I've always had on the pilot formula is, how do we determine how much, what the value of state-owned property or college and hospital property is in a particular community? Is it based solely on the acreage they take up, or does the current formula factor in sort of the amount of development on that property? I guess what I'm getting at is if the state itself or a college or hospital is holding a swath of land that they've not developed fully, it's taking away what otherwise could be taxable property for that municipality, but just because it's kind of sitting idle and is not fully developed, is that factored into the current pilot formula, if you know?
Thanks, Representative Scanlon. So my understanding is that non-taxable property is assessed in the same way as a taxable property. So when the revaluation is done and the periodic amendments or updates are made to the grand list, there is an assessment made of the value of property. So to the extent that property is undeveloped, it would be valued at a lower amount, just as it would if it were in private hands.
Okay, so so if you have two universities and they each take up 30 acres of land in a particular municipality, if the property, if the buildings on one of those universities is valued significantly higher because they've got advanced science labs and the like, as opposed to another school that may cater to a different population and may not have as many developed buildings to it and as much investment and as big of an endowment, so to say, the one that's more developed would be worth more in the current pilot formula. Is that correct?
That's right, Representative.
Okay. Even though obviously it's the same amount of property that's not available to that municipality to otherwise tax or put out for development.
I believe that's right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Representative.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Cheeseman, followed by Senator Fonfara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mayor Bronin. So I asked this question of the Alder, approximately how much more per year would this amount to in terms of pilot funding for Hartford?
Thanks, Representative Cheeseman. So our estimate based on the formula in this bill is that Hartford would receive approximately $22 million additional funding under the pilot formula under this bill. But I think it's important to put that number in context. If the existing pilot formula, which has been on the books for decades, were fully funded, the city of Hartford would receive approximately $100 million more than it currently receives. If state property were reimbursed at the same level as colleges and hospitals, the city of Hartford would receive more than $120 million more than it currently receives. I say all that to say, to emphasize the point that I made earlier, which is while we and I consider this to be an important step forward, it's important to recognize that this does not come anywhere close to fully funding the existing pilot formula, and nor does it come anywhere close to fully addressing the structural deficiencies that come when you have communities that have half of the property non-taxable.
Now, I know in conversations about New Haven, Yale makes voluntary payments to the city. Does Hartford receive voluntary payments from any of your larger non-for-profits, universities?
We do not.
All right, and in terms,
not for lack of trying.
Yeah, I'm sure. And in terms of growth of your grant list, what are you seeing?
We will be conducting a revaluation this year. So our city will be revalued as of October of 2021. I will tell you, our long-term sustainability plan had an assumption of 3.5% increase in this next reval. My guess is that we will not see anything like that. I think that I don't want to get too far down this hole unless you'd like me to, but I do think that the impact of the coronavirus on Hartford will be significant and will be delayed because the strong likelihood is that commercial tenants do not come back as fully with as large a footprint as they had pre-pandemic. Even if they retain the space, they're not going to come back at 100%. The result is that while we made huge progress in recent years at chipping away at the vacancy rate in our commercial office buildings, I think we've been knocked back pretty far. And that will be could be reflected in the value of those commercial office buildings in the years ahead. So I'm very concerned about the longer term impact of coronavirus on the grand list and on our ability to sustain the levels of grand list growth that we need. The other thing I would say, Representative, although this is not direct question, is grand list growth is important, but the absolute value of the grand list is also important. And just as a point of reference, Hartford's grand list is roughly $4 billion. The taxable grand list is roughly $4 billion, which is roughly the same size as the taxable grand list in Glastonbury, which is roughly half the size of the taxable grand list in Darien. Which is, and as a fraction of the size of the grand list in many communities that are far smaller, with far lower need. And I think that gives you a sense of the extent of the disparities that we currently wrestle with.
So what is the, and pardon my ignorance, the annual operating budget for the city of Hartford?
The annual operating budget is $467 million.
Okay, I'm just looking at some figures, and the appropriated aid to Hartford in 20 and 21 was 317 million and then 331 million. That sounds to me like a significant sum of money, and that's not taking into account the deal, for want of a better word, we reached to pay off Hartford's long-term indebtedness. Not to deny the importance of our cities, but if I'm Bridgeport or New Haven, maybe I'm thinking, well, maybe we should be getting a sweeter deal here.
I certainly think that Bridgeport and New Haven should be getting more revenue. I would be and have been the first to advocate for a more funding formula for those cities as well. I think the fundamental problem that we face in Connecticut, which is not unique to the cities, is that we are an outlier when it comes to our over-reliance on the property tax. And when you ask municipalities to fund themselves on the property tax alone as the sole source of locally generated revenue, the result is vast disparities in terms of the mill rate that's required to sustain the level of need. And you don't have to take my word for that. The Boston Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, conducted a study where they analyzed what they call the need capacity gap, meaning how much does it cost to deliver basic core services in a particular city, and how much can the tax base of that city support? And what they found was enormous gaps in Connecticut, and in particular in Connecticut cities. Now, to your question about the aid received from the state, the bulk of that aid is educational aid. And I think, as you know, and I hope would agree, under Connecticut's constitution, the state of Connecticut has a constitutional obligation to provide equitable funding for education. I hope the state makes progress in more fully meeting that obligation in this coming budget. But the bulk of that aid that you reference is to schools.
We have hit our 5 minutes, just an FYI.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we could continue this conversation for ages. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. Senator Fonfaro, followed by Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mayor.
Afternoon,
good
Senator.
morning, Mayor. Still morning. Good to see you, even if it is this way. But my question, you've answered many of those in your remarks, as well as questions that were put to you previously. So mine will be very brief. Let's get some perspective here in terms of not just Hartford, but in general. But I think your answer regarding Hartford will be helpful for other municipalities in the state. If the non-taxable property in Hartford were not non-taxable, in other words, if it were fully taxed, what kind of revenue would that realize for the city?
If all of the non-taxable property in the city were fully taxed, excluding city-owned property, so not talking about city-owned property, but other non-taxable property were fully taxed, the city would generate approximately $223 million more each year.
So it goes to your point that as important as Senator Looney's proposal is, was that about 1/10 of what you would receive if properties were not taxable, were not tax exempt?
That's correct, Senator.
And I guess Representative Staffstrom did allude to this, but what, and this is my last question, but what could you envision? Obviously, it's you'd have to envision something, but if the state-owned properties could generate private investment, what would that realize? Would that number be different than what you just gave us?
It would be different, Senator, because state-owned properties are just one category of the non-taxable property that we have. But it's important to note that a number of the state-owned properties are properties that would likely be strong candidates for private ownership, private investment, and full taxability. If you think about the buildings that the state owns, the City Well Center on Columbus Boulevard, one of our largest office complexes. If you think about the buildings the building at the intersection of Farmington Asylum, large office building. If you think about the buildings that the state owns near Bushnell Park, large office buildings that could be ripe for either conversion to residential or for continuation as office buildings. So there's a lot of prime real estate that is owned by the state of Connecticut in the city of Hartford. And I also think it's important to note that even under this bill, and again, I want to express, I see Senator Looney on there, and I don't know if he was there when I expressed my appreciation for him putting this bill forward, but even under this bill, state property would still be reimbursed at a lower percentage than college and hospital property. And I think it's worth highlighting that. There is, in the existing pilot formula and still under this bill, a significant difference between the rate at which state property is reimbursed and college and hospital property is reimbursed.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment that and Senator Looney will be coming up shortly to speak on this as well, but I think the amount of time, and I was unable to get on until we had already started, but my sense is that the testimony so far has been a majority about this particular aspect of the bill, which just, I think, speaks to the importance of what you've said and what many of us have known for and tried to address for years now, which is that when you say to towns the only significant revenue opportunity you have is through a property tax, and where in some towns the property tax works great, there are many communities, and I would argue many more communities each year where it doesn't. And this is Senator Looney has been on this issue for many years, but whether it's pilot or whatever it is, if the legislature doesn't recognize and the administration doesn't recognize what we're doing to towns in terms of creating more and more haves and more have-nots and fewer haves, it divides our state increasingly every year. Thank you, Mayor, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Next up, we have Representative Devlin, followed by Representative Nuccio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mayor, for being here today and for sharing your testimony. Many of my questions have been answered, but just maybe a couple of clarifying things you can help with. And first of all, let me start out just by stating that, I fully support revitalizing our cities. I think it is essential and critical to the economic success and future of our state. I think there's too little attention paid to the revitalization of our cities right now, although it was at one point a priority of the governor, and at one point it was the priority for our DECD commissioner. I hope that regains its status in terms of focus going forward. I'm not exactly sure why we were even talking about this provision here versus appropriations, because I think the issue is, right, it is appropriations of money to pilot or for pilot. But all of that said, right, there's been deficiencies in the state.
Representative, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if everyone can put their phone on mute, especially members, thank you very much. Sorry, Representative, just want to make sure you're getting heard.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The state certainly has had challenges on making good on payments to municipalities. I think the last sales tax increase was justified in part by sending more money to our municipalities, and that didn't happen either. So why do you think the issue is that pilot hasn't been funded? you said earlier, I think with our good ranking member, that Hartford would be receiving $100 million more than it currently is. Why is that not happening?
Representative, I'm not sure that I can offer any greater insight than you can. I think it is a matter of where the priority has been placed in the budget process over the years, and that as the state has faced fiscal challenges, that commitment to fully funding pilot has suffered. I think you raise a really important point, Representative, about the last sales tax increase, and as you know. I would use probably stronger language than you did when you said it was justified in part. A half of that additional point of sales tax was promised to local governments in the form of the municipal revenue sharing account, which was a needs-based formula that would have made a dramatic dent in the over-reliance on property taxes and the disparities in tax base and tax levels in the state. I do think that it's important not to lose sight of that. I recognize that the state faces its own significant fiscal challenges and has to prioritize among many priorities, but we should not forget that when that sales tax was increased, it was increased for the purpose of in half of it was promised for the purpose of reducing the reliance on the property tax and increasing funding to municipalities. And here again, I think that this bill before you makes important progress, represents important progress, and would be an important step forward toward more fully funding the pilot, which is another form of accomplishing the same goal. But I hope that the members don't lose sight of the fact that that promise, both the pilot promise from decades ago and the municipal revenue sharing account, which would have benefited many cities and towns across the state, have in the meantime fallen by the wayside.
No, I would agree with you. Prioritization is key. And, sometimes we make new programs that cost more money as opposed to focusing on obligations that we have that could really sustain and help our state from a bigger perspective. But let me ask you about this particular proposal. I'll be honest, right? This bill has morphed quickly. So these are pieces of it that are relatively new from what I anticipated before. But under this scheme, in the tier of which Hartford would be part, if I understood what you said again to the good ranking member, instead of $100 million that Hartford technically would be due under the existing program, Hartford would receive $22 million more. Is that correct? I think you're muted, Mr. Mayor.
My apologies. Thank you. That's my understanding, Representative.
Okay, and does that come at the expense then of other municipalities? Is this a shift?
No, I think that's, thank you for mentioning that. That is a very, very important point. This bill would also hold harmless the amount of pilot funding received by other municipalities.
Okay, great. Listen, thank you very much for your answers to my questions. I appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. And if I might add on that last point, that I think is an important reason why the wide diversity of communities represented by the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities is in united support of this bill.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Pilot is an issue across the state, no doubt. I know our cities feel it more. And again, I would just emphasize the focus on revitalization of our, urban centers is really critical. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And just as a reminder to members, I did not say this at the onset of the meeting, but we're trying to limit interactions with witnesses to 5 minutes per member, just to give folks a chance to talk. So everyone's been pretty good about that so far, but just putting that out there. I see we have a lot of folks interested in talking to Mayor Bronin, which they should be because he's got a lot of good stuff to say, but want to make sure we're limiting ourselves to get to as many members as possible and respect the members of the public who are waiting to testify right now. So with that said, I have Representative Nuccio, followed by Representative Wood, followed by Representative Mastro Francesco.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I have a lot of chairwomen, so I can't say Madam Chair now. So thank you very much, and welcome, Mayor Bronin. So you said something that I think people will learn about me fairly quick, and I'm a big proponent of do what you say what you're going to do. So the fact that the sales tax was raised and the money didn't go where it was supposed to go is really a pet peeve of mine on pretty much every single piece of legislation that has money attached to it that says it's going to go to someplace else. So
I'm sure people will hear me say that a lot. In relation to the numbers you mentioned for your grand list, the new reval coming up, you've mentioned that you thought the coronavirus was going to have a negative impact on your grand list. And I know, like, unless I'm mistaken, your brick and mortar will still be there, and that coronavirus shouldn't have an impact on the brick and mortar. Are you referencing more the personal property tax?
No, Representative, I'm representing the value of the brick and mortar as well. The value is a function of, it's not a function of the materials the building is built with. It's a function of the revenue that can be generated by that building. So if you have an office building that is half empty in a market that is struggling to retain tenants, those buildings will be worth far less than a building that is 100% full in a market that is oversubscribed. It's also a function of the average rent that can be obtained in a commercial office building. And again, that's driven by the supply and demand.
So you're saying that
you are right that it would also have an impact on personal property. So it would hit both sides of that.
So you're thinking that your buildings are actually going to be devalued?
I think it's entirely possible. You know, I can't look ahead with perfect foresight, but I am very concerned that while many communities around the state have seen their grand list go up dramatically because of the hot residential real estate market. Particularly, we're talking about larger lot homes, that some cities, including Hartford, that are more dependent on that commercial property tax base may actually take a hit, and it may be a significant hit in the years ahead.
Okay, and do you have your evaluations, your assess? Are they done by an outside evaluator, or do you do that in-house?
We use a consultant to conduct the reval process, and of course, our assessor is actively and deeply engaged in reviewing that work.
So you just happen to just be in a bad cycle where you're getting it right after coronavirus rather than before, from a valuation perspective.
You know, it's hard to time reval cycles as it is hard to time the market. But I will tell you, look, it may be, the truth is, it may be that it's better for us that we're evaluating this year rather than 2 years from now. It may be that the impact of the coronavirus is delayed. You know, you've got a lot of long-term leases on buildings that may come up over a period of years. And so the impact might actually be felt 2-3 years down the road rather than right now. So there's a lot we don't know, but I think it is worth noting that you could see, as a result of the coronavirus, an even greater divergence in the tax base between certain communities.
All right, thank you very much for your answers. I appreciate it.
Representative Wood, followed by Representative Mastro Francesco.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mayor Bronin, for being here. I want to reiterate the comments of my colleague, Representative Devlin, that I think most of us feel deep passion for making sure our cities are revitalized and they're functional and have so many assets that we can be proud of and promote. So my two questions to you are, what is the total amount of pilot funding that is underfunded every year? As chairman of CCM, I'm sure you know that.
Do you mean statewide?
Yes, statewide.
Representative, I apologize. I actually do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
Happy to get it, and I'm sure you can, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. I'm just wondering the proportion of it. And like Representative Nuccio, I too feel deep frustration that we promise something and we don't follow through. And I believe we should be fully funding pilot and finding out a way to pay for it. How would you recommend that we pay for fully funding the pilot program?
Well, you know, Representative, I would leave that to you. I think that is a decision for I think that's a decision for the legislature. But I will say, going back to the point that Representative Devlin made, I would argue, and to some extent, that discussion and decision was already made a few years ago. That CCM advocated strongly for the creation of the municipal revenue sharing account, that CCM supported the increase in the sales tax, in part because it was a way to fund, finally, a formula for addressing Connecticut's over-reliance on the property tax in a meaningful way. And so I think one answer to your question is that question's already been answered. Unfortunately, it was answered and then forgotten.
Right, but I asked you what your thoughts would be on funding this.
Well, but my answer, Representative, is that you would fund it out of the 0.5% of sales tax that you increased with the promise of providing that funding to municipalities. As you balance the overall balance of costs and revenue for the state, I don't presume to stand in your shoes.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bronin, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Representative Mastro Francesco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mayor Bronin, for your time and your testimony today. Appreciate you clearing. There's a lot of questions, so I appreciate you clearing them up. Just two quick questions. You may have answered this already and may have missed it, but what is your grand list total right now before revaluation?
It's approximately $4 billion, Representative.
$4 billion. And then what is your grand list reduced by after the percentage of collection of taxes?
Well, the percentage of non-taxable property in the city is just about exactly 50%.
So on the taxable property, what is the collection rate on that percentage?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So how much does that reduce your grand list by?
Sure. Our collection rate has hovered around 96%.
Around 96%, which is pretty good considering it's a big city. I know a lot of smaller towns are around 98%. So
and considering, Representative, that the mill rate is 74.
Yes, right. So the grand list of $4 billion is the taxable grand list, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I had. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Thank you, members.
All right. I saw Stephen Stasniak.
He should be in here, yes.
Yep. And then I think we're at Senator Looney after that, right, Deb?
You have sorry, it's Tom. You have Stephen Stasniak, Lori Lichtenberg, then Senator Looney.
Okay. Mr. Stasniak, please proceed.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, good afternoon now. So good afternoon, Chairman Scanlon, members of the committee. My name is Stephen Stasniak. I speak to you as a resident of New Haven, someone who's been called Connecticut home for almost my entire life. Parent of 2 children, one of whom is a first grader in New Haven Public Schools. And then today, most specifically, as a teacher and union member of Local 933 in the New Haven Public Schools. I teach 9th grade English at Metropolitan Business Academy, one of our fine schools here in New Haven. In my life as a teacher every day, I act on the belief that what is fair is not always equal. A student who needs a hall pass to visit the library for a new independent reading book does not and should not be treated the same way as a student recovering from the effects of a traumatic event. And just like my class rosters are full of students with unique circumstances and needs, our state is made up of 169 towns and cities with unique circumstances and needs. Finding a way to build community in spaces with such a variety of needs takes practice, takes a lot of reflection, takes a lot of support, but it's definitely doable. This year, my virtual classroom is populated with students forced to deal with the challenges of the pandemic, layered upon the normal challenges that adolescents face in any normal, quote unquote, school year. My students this year will need support to heal from the pandemic that lasts far beyond this school year or next. In school buildings specifically, this means fully staffed schools, having a nurse in every building, having an appropriate number of guidance counselors, a library media specialist in every building, social workers, and of course, enough classroom teachers. It means resources like having libraries full of books with rich and diverse titles to support our readers at all levels. It means extracurricular enrichment activities, and it means before and after care in every school for all of our working families. Just last year in New Haven, we had to close an approximately $10 million budget gap just to put it, as our Board of Ed CFO put it, keep our lights on. And this year, many of our students are coming from families and communities being hit hardest by the pandemic. Communities where incidents of COVID were far higher than in other parts of our state because working from home or social distancing from family members exposed to COVID was just not possible for so many. Support for Senate Bill 873 and other bills like it is about making sure that young people and all people in New Haven and all across our state have fully funded schools, wraparound service, and a network of community support to ensure healthy communities as we begin the long road to recovery. But it is also about beginning to take steps to repair the harm done over generations of inequitable funding structures, where that harm falls disproportionately on working residents and residents of color. Lifting up a city like New Haven, as Senate Bill 873 will begin to do, will lift up our entire New Haven region, as so many before me have already said. What is good for New Haven is good for East Haven and West Haven and Hamden, and I would argue is good for the entire state. And this is true for all the municipal regions that will benefit from a restructuring of Pilot. Though not a perfect analogy, when I have the resources to support
3-minute
those students,
warning, just a 3-minute warning.
With the greatest needs in my classroom, they benefit, but so do all the students around me. Just like we can build stronger municipal regions and in turn build a stronger state. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all so much for your service to our state.
Thank you, Mr. Stasiak, and thank you for your service to the students that you have there in New Haven. Really appreciate that, especially in this difficult time. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for being with us today. Next, we're going to go to Senator Looney. Senator, are you here?
Can you hear me?
Hi, Senator.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman, members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, which I once had the great honor to chair as the Senate Chair for 6 years. And I'm here to speak in support of Senate Bill 873, in particular that portion of it that would deal with the creation of a 3-tiered pilot structure. One of the key issues with Pilot is, in addition to the underfunding over the years, it was first established back in the late 1970s to recognize the fact that communities that have tax-exempt property, notably college and hospital and university, private universities, and also hospitals, bear a unique service burden for a facility that perhaps benefits the entire state or perhaps even the entire nation. The funding has never kept pace with what was initially promised to be. But one of the other problems with Pilot from the very beginning is that whatever level of reimbursement was set in a given year was applied to all Pilot property, regardless of need. We all know that in Connecticut, there are some communities that have virtually no tax-exempt property in the very low single digits. There are others like New Haven, Hartford, New London, and Mansfield that have 50% or more of their property as tax-exempt. And yet the funding has been applied at whatever percentage was funded in a given year. We address this in this proposal by creating 3 tiers, a top tier, which would be 50%, a second tier of 40, and a third tier of 30, so that everyone under this proposal would receive more than they are currently receiving under Pilot. So right now, Pilot is funded at about 25% and of the authorized level. So that even the third tier would be higher than current levels. Some folks asked earlier about what the full funding of Pilot would be. According to data from the Office of Fiscal Analysis, in fiscal 21, our state budget provided $158 million in funding for Pilot, and $613 million would be needed to fully fund the Pilot program. It is the underfunding is stark and gets worse from year to year. The proposal here would cost $129 million in order to create the greater equity that we have by creating this 3-tiered formula. One of the challenges, of course, is that the communities that at the lower end suffer in many ways from having anemic grand lists. And that is the great challenge, is that communities at the upper end of wealth have extraordinarily robust grand lists. So for instance, the top 4 in our state have grand lists that exceed $500,000 per capita, with Greenwich at the top at about $740,000, followed by Darien, New Canaan, and Westport. Those 4 at the bottom end, again, numbers 169 and counting backward, are New Britain at $50,000, 329, Waterbury at 53, and the next 2 lowest after Waterbury are Wyndham and Hartford, all under $60,000 a year per capita. So we see the stark disparities, and that is why Greenwich is able to fund all of its services at a very modest mill rate, and yet the poorer municipalities with a lack of an adequate tax base compounded by tax exempt properties struggle so much. It's important to keep in mind, I think, that what is taken into account in this formula as well is not only the needs of the larger cities that have a lot of tax exempt property, but also smaller communities throughout the state that may not have a lot of tax exempt property, but still have relatively modest grand lists of under $100,000 per capita. So that while only a select number of communities have college property or hospital property, most communities have at least some state property, even if a modest amount. And therefore, they would be helped under this proposal as well. To address Mayor Bronin's point earlier, this is in fact only a partial adjustment of what has been the historic underfunding of pilot. I would certainly support a more aggressive proposal to fund it even higher, to get close to the 77% authorized level for college and hospital pilot, or the level for municipal pilot, for state property pilot as well. Again, this is a needed initiative on this issue that I think has for so long been unaddressed, that the inequities and injustices have become much more severe. But if the committee in the General Assembly wants to go even further to correct past wrongs by funding the pilot at an even higher level, I would certainly be a champion of that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Looney, thank you for your testimony today. Thank you for bringing this bill to our committee, and thank you for your leadership on this issue throughout the course of your career. First off, we'll go to Representative Cheeseman, followed by Representative Wood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today, Senator Looney. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is there is nothing in this proposal that actually increases the amount of pilot funding. That continues to be dependent on the amount that is appropriated through the budget. Am I correct?
Yes, that is true. Although if we set the current language in statute authorizes a level of pilot up to 77%, but it's subject to the annual appropriation. This would set a specific level by statute in 3 tiers.
So I'm just comparing what you were saying to the information I had from OFA that indicates that, again, it's dependent on, what would be appropriated. And I wasn't seeing in the bill that this actually committed every year to a specific level.
Well, the intent is to set these specific levels rather than just authorizations to say that the General Assembly obviously can legislate every session and can always change it if it chooses to, but it would be putting down a marker for recognizing that pilot has been underfunded overall, but particularly underfunded by not taking need into account, given the various needs of different municipalities, both in terms of the overall level of tax exempt property they have and the overall health or lack of health of their grand lists.
So it's basically changing the formula by which we would allocate it, using grand list levels as the criteria for making those determinations.
The tiers, right, would depend on the grand list. So those under $100,000 per capita grand list would be in the first tier, those between 100 and 200 in the second tier, and over 200 would be in the third tier. So I think last look, there were about 32 municipalities that had grand lists of under 100,000. There were about 101 in the second tier, and then I think 36 would be in the top tier or bottom tier in terms of reimbursement.
And this, again, the legislation would set a formula by which, if the sufficient money is not appropriated, again, the money would be allocated based on this new 3-tier system, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so a way to address the historical differences in terms of towns' wealth base.
Yes, that's right. Because as I said, some towns have virtually no tax exempt property, and yet currently they receive the same percentage of reimbursement under the college and hospital and state property pilot as those who have a very high level of tax exempt property.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm somewhat baffled by why this is a before appropriations instead of us, but I appreciate you coming here and explaining some of the questions, answers to the questions that I had. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wood, followed by Representative Staffstrom.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Looney. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yes,
and
good to see you.
I find this a fascinating topic. It's funny because the urban districts and the Democrats have run the legislature for 40 years, yet we're underfunding pilots. So I wonder if you can tell me why that's happened. under your leadership, I would think we would have fully funded the pilot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that kind question. And I will say that there have been many needs that have had to be met over the years. And now it's time to catch up on this one.
Right. Agreed. I think we all agree that we need to absolutely stand in support of revitalizing our cities. Second question is, would you choose to fix this problem? Would you choose to stick, if we could totally fund the pilot program, stick with that, or move on to this new grand list formula?
I think this new grand list formula is more equitable because it does take need into account. I think there are some communities in the state that don't need 77% reimbursement for their pilot eligible property, and others need as much as they can possibly get.
Thank you. I could continue on, but I know we've got a lot of speakers, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue on this. Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. The Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Representative Staffstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you, as always, for bringing forward proposals like this. Certainly ones that I know will benefit, all of our communities, in particular cities. Although, to some extent, maybe to varying degrees. Just a couple quick questions for you on the formula. As I understand it, the formula currently before us doesn't do anything to change how we set the value of colleges and hospitals, does it?
No, it does not. My understanding is, and I think Mayor Bronin talked about this, is that the municipalities assess the property, the tax exempt pilot eligible property, and submit those assessments to OPM for review. And then all goes into an evaluation of the corpus of pilot eligible property in the state. And then once the funding is allocated, it is apportioned based upon value. Obviously, New Haven has the most tax exempt college and hospital property in the state. Hartford has the most tax exempt state property in the state. And as you know, there are lots of other kinds of tax exempt property for which there is no pilot. And then, of course, there's a separate pilot for prisons and a separate pilot for, I think, for UConn Medical Center. And there are other separate pilots that were passed over time for various policy reasons. But for these two, obviously, it is based upon an agreed upon assessment that is assigned to the property that then OPM calculates its percentage for each community based upon what percent of the overall corpus of tax exempt property a given community has.
Yeah, I that's my understanding as well. I think I guess the question I had though is the way I understand how assessors are required to value colleges and hospitals is on a cost basis. So if you have a university that has a lot of very fancy buildings, built of stone and are worth more, they have expensive science labs, newer facilities and the like, that is going to increase the assessed value for those facilities vis-a-vis a university that may not have nearly the resources or the level of investment into its facilities. So despite the acreage of the particular universities, you're going to value a university that has more assets higher than another university. And I'm just wondering whether this change, as we look at need and as we look at how to more equitably distribute the pilot dollars available, whether you had considered taking a look at that aspect as well, about the sheer acreage that's being taken up in a particular community as opposed to the value of the buildings on it.
Well, I think that's certainly a way of also placing valuation on it. But of course, there is a tremendous difference, potential difference in valuation between two businesses or two buildings that take up the same relative amount of space on a city street. But one of them could be much more valuable than another, depending on the amenities in that building or the materials with which it's constructed.
Right, but if the idea is to compensate a municipality for the fact that that acreage is not otherwise available to the town or the city as taxable property, aren't we really concerned about is the total acreage that's being taken away, or the percentage of acreage that's being taken away from otherwise taxable uses, as opposed to what improvements are on those buildings?
Well, I think that the real purpose of pilots has been historically not to look at just acreage and space, but to look at the value of the tax exempt property and see what the taxes on that property would have been with all of its amenities or lack of amenities if it had been on the grand list for tax purposes.
All right, thank you for that explanation, Senator. I appreciate it, and again, I really do appreciate your work and your advocacy on behalf of the citizens of our state. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Roland Lamar from New Haven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for your testimony today. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I have a few questions. I'm a little taken back by a question I heard earlier about why we haven't fixed this already. And I want to focus a little bit on the construct of pilot, and I know you had a lot to do with the origin and development of this proposal originally, and I want to thank you for that. But more focus on why it was necessary, like why we're talking about pilot is a unique quirk of Connecticut and a little bit New England, but of Connecticut structure of our towns and cities relying so much on the property tax, and us having so little available land, specifically in our urban centers, that's eligible for taxation to support the larger region. You know, the idea that we could just, you know, at state government just fix this problem is absurd to me, that we'd be that divorced from the reality of our unique quirks. Could you talk a little bit about why in the original construct of pilot we looked at this form? Was it based upon the unique way that we structure our cities and towns, the lack of county government, the way that we're forcing New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, the New Britons of the world to fund all regional support services?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Representative Lamar, all of the above. First of all, our cities are needy, just as cities are all over the country in many ways, with concentrations of lower income people with greater need for services. But also our cities tend to have a great deal of property, as we've said, that is tax exempt, placing even a higher burden on the portion that is taxable. But in addition to that, as you said, the fact that our communities have this much tax exempt property means that space is being lost that could otherwise be developed for other uses. That's compounded by the fact that all of our cities, unfortunately, are very small in area. That is another problem. New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport are much smaller in areas than many of their suburbs. If you look at the cities on a map, obviously you see how small they are when a scale map in terms of area of the city, not population of a city, they are very small. Most of the suburban towns bordering on our cities are larger in area than the cities are themselves. So space is at a premium. Development space is at a premium, and the historic fact that so much property is tax exempt in those cities is made even more difficult by that. In addition, as you know, and as you pointed out, there is something especially regressive about the property tax, the way it affects people of lower income, that whether you look at the property tax either as a percent of the value of the property or as a percentage of the income of the people who own the property, it tends to be more burdensome in the urban areas than it is elsewhere. And that's been a problem forever, is that obviously other taxes that the state levies itself, the income tax and the sales tax, are at least your financial situation will affect your tax liability. If your income goes down in a given year, you'll pay less income tax, or you may cut back on your spending, so you'll pay less sales tax. But the property, as long as you own it, you're stuck with whatever the taxes are. A property that might be supportable with a two-income family, one of the partners loses an income, loses a job. The property tax is not sensitive to that change in income status. In fact, there was a study a few years ago that pointed out that in Connecticut, the total of state and local taxes by family income these are for non-elderly taxpayers who may be eligible for some extra credits. The lowest 20% with incomes less than about $24,000 a year pay about 11.5% overall in total taxes to the states and municipalities. And at the upper tiers, the top 1% pays about 8.1% overall, and the next 4% pays 9.6. So the top 5% pay between 8.1 and 9.6. The bottom two tiers pay either 11.5 or about 9.5. So that shows you exactly, that doesn't separate out the property tax by itself, but it does point out that for most people in this state find the property tax more burdensome than any tax directly levied by the state. But it is in effect levied by the state indirectly because it is what it is because of the state not raising the revenue and spending the revenue necessary to offset the local property tax. It's also, as you mentioned, the absence of county government in Connecticut is another factor that other states have services provided by 3 levels of government. Here, it's either the state or the municipality. So each one bears a greater burden than they do in most other states where economies of scale are not possible in Connecticut because we have 169 jealously self-protective fiefdoms who are often unable or unwilling to engage in combinations to achieve economies of scale by creating joint ventures or districts that would provide services on a regional basis. So all of these things come together, and the problems with the pilot and the problems with the property tax overall are just symptomatic of the larger problem of how we're organized.
Thank you. I just want to highlight that we have very interesting ways of.
We are at our 5-minute warning, just a 5-minute warning.
Yep, we have very interesting ways that we developed in the last few years with your leadership on how to accommodate these very unique peculiarities in Connecticut governance, like the absence of counties, the absence of regionalism, the absence of an ability to manage problems on a more regional basis, combined with the fact that we have a state spending cap that prohibits us from utilizing state resources to better address those inequities. I do appreciate both the construct, the original version of pilot, and I am deeply thankful for this new amendment to a new recalibration of it as well. And so thank you, Senator Looney, for your leadership on this issue, both in the past and present. And I think it's a good way for us to move forward.
Thank you, Representative Lamar, and for your work on this as well.
Representative Pallillo, forgive me here for asking a quick question before we go to you of Senator Looney. And that's Senator Looney, you mentioned something that I was wondering. In your very good long memory, do you know if anybody in New Haven has ever calculated what the impact would have been on reducing New Haven's long-term liabilities if they had been getting fully funded amounts of money from pilot over the years? My guess is that New Haven and Hartford and other cities that have these long-term liabilities, there would be a way to calculate that they would have had lesser liabilities had they been getting fully funded payments of pilot. And I'm wondering if you talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's certainly true, Mr. Chairman. I don't know exactly what that figure would be, but I know it is substantial, having discussed it with city officials. The current underfunding of pilot, it is estimated that it is the equivalent is costing New Haven about 21 mils worth of revenue per year, and Hartford about 18. So that, I think, is a dramatic example of what they're facing.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Pallillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator, for being here today and for putting forward this tiered approach, which for many municipalities, as has been mentioned, not just urban areas, not just cities, that would benefit from this proposal. And I think to take that a step further, creating consistent revenue streams and having predictable revenue streams moving forward, whereas not relying on infusions of dollars or one-time payments to cities, which or to municipalities, which then creates greater holes moving forward. So having that forethought and having that approach now that is going to be able to not only allow folks locally to budget with consistent revenue streams, but also to be able to attract businesses and to continue to grow. And on that fact, I wanted to kind of turn to New Haven for a second, which you've represented for so long, and the work that you've been able to do to benefit the city. But looking at grand list growth in the city, being estimated about 2% for last year. But it's really not 2% when you take into account 55 or 60% that is tax exempt. So when you're looking at less than 1%, this would also, in the long term, Senator, help municipalities, not just New Haven, but overall, to be able to stabilize and to have further growth by stabilizing their mill rates. And I wanted to see if you would take a chance to an opportunity to address that.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, because the when you take half the grand list off the table, even when there's an overall increase in the grand list, there's a substantial dent put in that by the fact that so much of the grand list is not accessible for tax purposes. And as we know, the pilot doesn't address all of the other categories of tax exempt property that exist for which there is no pilot. And that's also true that churches, synagogues, social service agencies that own their own buildings, all of those are off the tax list as well, that contribute to the overall number in some cities that exceeds 50%.
So in terms of dollars, looking at the grand list and percentages that are exempt for New Haven, for instance, what we're actually getting in the city, for instance, on pilot right now, and what this would mean for a difference moving forward for additional funding, what would that number be, approximately?
Approximately, right now, the city of New Haven, under current law, if the pilot were actually fully funded, in other words, if the full statute were being complied with at 77% funding, or I'll say the aspirational level, if not the authorized level, would be $182,583,000. The tiered pilot payment under this bill would give the city $91 million for an increase of, and its current level of funding is $41 million. So it would be a $49 million increase for pilot for New Haven if this provision were enacted. Obviously, Hartford would be second in terms of the net amount of additional revenue brought in. And as I said, Hartford has the greatest amount of tax exempt state property. And Hartford's would be $104 million currently, if fully funded. Under tiered pilot, it would get 52. Under the current level of funding, or proposed for 21, it would get 30, so it would have a net increase of over 22 million.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Senator. This is certainly an investment in our cities, in our towns. You had mentioned the far-reaching benefits for all municipalities, certainly, and thank you for your continued advocacy here, and for having a consistent revenue stream that just doesn't rely on one time and boosts with 1 year's worth of funding. So again, thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I might add, Representative Paolillo, you mentioned in terms of economic development, clearly with this proposal to go forward, or any upward adjustment in pilot, it would also be a shot in the arm for economic development purposes for cities like New Haven, like Hartford, like others that are greatly in need, because by being able to have a lower effective tax rate, they would be much more attractive to businesses and be able to attract more startup businesses, more small businesses, more entrepreneurs who would see a property tax climate in the city that was not off-putting the way they often see it now.
Certainly, and this is one way to back up that talk about investing in urban areas. That certainly goes to the core here. So thank you for your work, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions for Senator Looney? If not, Senator, thank you again for being here today and for putting forward this idea. We look forward to debating in the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. To you, Senator Fonfara, the other members of the committee. The Finance Committee is one, obviously, is one of the most thoughtful, and one that engages in a comprehensive way with some of the most important policies in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. I believe next we have Lori Lichtenberg, followed by Jenna McDermott.
Hi.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scallon, and members of the committee, good afternoon. And thank you for the opportunity to share my support of Senate Bill 873 to create 3 need-based tiers with a pilot formula and provide the necessary funding to make it possible. The City of New Haven is one of the many municipalities across the state to struggle to keep up public service with a shrinking tax base as the nonprofit sector replaces the former industrial base. New Haven brings a wealth of diversity and opportunity to many across the state, and as a result, creating an attractive base for nonprofits and tax-exempt entities. As a library technical assistant at the New Haven Free Public Library, and as president of the city's clerical union, AFSCME Local 884, daily I see the financial struggles of the residents. In today's economy, it is not just a matter of being poor. The essentials of modern life go wanting, all exacerbated by the COVID crisis. One needs internet access to complete a job application. One needs technology literacy to effectively correspond with email, send documents, make applications. One needs the technology to complete the business of daily life, a computer, internet access, a printer. These essentials of modern living take precedence next to housing, family meals, and education. Tax-funded institutions such as public libraries are essential to support technology, literacy, instruction, and provide public access help desks to navigate the many challenges of daily living. Stable funding of pilot, along with a distribution system that directs money to where the need is greater, including library services, will give most residents access to economic recovery and financial stability. A tiered pilot, as proposed in SB 873, will help the diverse collection of municipalities across the state by allocating resources more effectively to assist towns with the least ability to offset lost property tax and revenue. These are much needed funds to meet the costs of essential services. Connecticut brings a wealth of diversity and opportunity, but there is vast inequity in technology access, housing conditions, and food security. For a vibrant state, we can do better. And SB 873 is one tool to give every taxpayer a fair shot at success. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ms. Lichtenberg, for your testimony today. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much.
You're welcome, thank you.
And we'll move on to whoever is next, Jenna McDermott or First Selectwoman Jamie Stevenson.
Jenna should
morning.
be here, yep.
Hi. Good morning. My name is Jenna McDermott. I live at 80 William Street here in New Haven, Connecticut. I am a public school teacher, and I have worked in New Haven Public Schools for 11 years. I'm testifying in support, strong support of Senate Bill 873. I think that we badly need to restructure the system by which municipalities and municipalities with many college and hospital-owned lands are reimbursed by the state so that these communities like New Haven can have the chance to thrive. Like many before me have said, the entire state of Connecticut benefits from the economic and cultural vitality of cities in the state. Like others have pointed out, over 50% of the land in New Haven is exempt from taxation, and the state has never fully funded the pilot program. New Haven has a projected deficit of $66 million, in part because the pilot program has never been fully and rightfully funded. As a public school teacher of 11 years, I have seen firsthand how many students and their families are impacted by manifestations of poverty, health disparities, gun violence, incarceration, toxic stress, and much, much more. Classrooms in New Haven have a fraction of the resources that many municipalities with less tax-exempt property have. Yet, many New Haven students and families are in great need of social workers, school counselors, school nurses, and much, much more. Our schools are filled with bright and talented young people that will shape all of our futures, yet we as an entire state chronically underinvest in their potential. Not for nothing, as an experienced and culturally competent teacher with close ties to my school community, I wish so badly to purchase a home in New Haven. I want to live in the community where I work. However, after working in New Haven public schools for over a decade, I cannot afford a home in the city of New Haven due to the prohibitively high property taxes. As a teacher, it's culturally important for me to live and work in the same community, but I find myself shopping for a home in towns with more reasonable property taxes, such as Ansonia, East Haven, North Haven, and North Branford. Allocating more money to the pilot program and using the 3 tiers described by Senator Martin Looney will decrease New Haven's projected deficit and better ensure that the city can provide services for students, families, as well as vulnerable people. It will also make New Haven a feasible place to purchase a home for people who work in New Haven and consider the city to be their home. It sounds like you already are, but I just want to urge support of this bill. Thank you so much, Senator Looney, for introducing this bill, and thank you all for your consideration.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for all you're doing as a teacher. I know that this year has been really challenging to be doing that, so thank you for your service in that regard. And I hope that you one day can afford that house in New Haven with our help by reforming this. So thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much. And next up, if she's here, First Selectwoman Jimmy Stevenson from Darien.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, ranking members Martin and Cheeseman, I appreciate the opportunity to be here testifying in support of Senate Bill 873. I'm Jamie Stevenson, Darien's first selectman and the first vice president of CCM. And today I'm here on behalf of CCM to offer our support for Senate Bill 873. The bill proposes, as you know, a tiered pilot system which begins to modestly address the problems created by Connecticut's over-reliance on a regressive property tax and inadequate state reimbursements. It's clear that cities and towns cannot rely solely on property tax to fund essential services like public education, police, fire, road maintenance, and other necessary and often mandated services. SB 873 proposes the creation of a 3-tiered reimbursement program based on municipalities' percentage of tax-exempt property and per capita equalized net grand list. State mandates weigh heavily upon our cities. The proposed tiers would provide additional reimbursements for our distressed municipalities and urban areas that have seen their property tax base erode through the adoption of more than 80, actually today I learned it's more like 99, property tax exemptions. This bill would provide modest relief by beginning to move the level of pilot reimbursement closer to what was promised in statute when exemptions were enacted. Further, the tiered system is intended to sunset when the state is able to fully fund its pilot obligations. While CCM supports Senate Bill 873 in concept, we'd like to suggest a couple of changes to the proposed language, and we hope that we can work with this committee and legislative leaders to ensure all towns and cities are held harmless in the creation of a tiered pilot reimbursement system. We cannot begin to fix the inequities of a regressive property tax system for a few by adding to the property tax burden of others. CCM estimates that the 3-tiered pilot proposal requires approximately $115 million in additional funding, yet no funding mechanism is proposed in Senate Bill 873. Without additional funding, reimbursements to each municipality would be reduced proportionally. We ask the committee to not implement this proposal unless it's accompanied by a promise to appropriate the additional $115 million necessary to make the proposal work for all 169 cities and towns. Holding municipalities harmless is a critical element of CCM's support for the tiered pilot program. CCM members strongly oppose the implementation of any type of statewide property tax to fund the additional appropriation needed to support Senate Bill 873. You cannot address the problems caused by the over-reliance on a regressive property tax by adding to that burden. Using the municipal revenue sharing account as an example, we have serious concerns that revenue from a statewide property tax would flow to the general fund instead of to cities and towns. New revenues from the adoption of sports betting, online gaming, or the legalization of recreational marijuana could be viable funding sources that the state can tap to fulfill pilot payment promises. CCM understands the needs of our urban centers and distressed municipalities. They're often asked to carry a heavy burden providing critical social services, hosting tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, while having to fund all manner of local government services paid for by property tax and government subsidy. Property tax bases have been eviscerated by state mandated exemptions.
We are at a 3-minute warning, just a heads up.
Okay, great. To be fully transparent, Senate Bill 873 would likely provide little benefit to my own community, but I, along with my CCM colleagues, understand that the health of our state is dependent on many factors. One of those is the health of our urban centers. My testimony today shows that local leaders representing urban, suburban, and rural communities, Republicans and Democrats alike, support the concept of a tiered pilot system. Meaningful reform and release from property tax should not be limited to a few select municipalities. We should collectively seek reforms that will benefit all by aiding our cities and distressed municipalities, supporting progress towards fully funding the state's pilot promises as a start. This is something that CCM can support. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony and your time today as well. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for coming today. Jamie, a quick question. This does not have to do with your testimony. The original purpose of this bill was to address the question of taxation of people working remotely. I know obviously a large percentage of your residents may have been working in New York and now working at home. Would you care to weigh in on this piece of the legislation? Is this something on which you feel comfortable to comment?
I would like to have a bit more time to review that element of the bill, Representative Cheeseman. You're exactly right. Many of my community members, while they traditionally work in Manhattan and use Metro North to get to and from work, have been working remotely. And from what I understand, most people will continue to work remotely for the foreseeable future, even when their businesses are back open in the city. So I would be happy to get back to you with my comments and provide those comments in writing to you.
All right, thank you so much. Nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tom, who do we have next? You're on
Kathy Flaherty should be here. She should be in here.
I'm here.
There you go.
Thank you.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Representative Scanlon, Senator Scanlon. Thank you for to all the members of the committee for allowing me to testify to you here today. I'm here to testify in support of SB 873, removing the welfare liens. I gave you some very abbreviated written testimony. The only thing I would like to do is supplement what I wrote to support the comments from the ACLU with regard to incarceration liens. I think a lot of the same language could be translated to people who are stuck in Demas facilities for a very long length of time and then get hit with the cost of a hospitalization that may not have been their choice. For those who don't know me, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Kathy Flaherty. I am the Executive Director of Connecticut Legal Rights Project, and we are a statewide nonprofit that represents people who receive mental health services from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. We are a legal aid agency, which means we represent people who live in poverty, with the special addition of people who live in poverty and live with a mental health illness or are perceived as having one. The liens basically hold people back. The state extends a helping hand in offering various types of assistance. And then when people have accomplished exactly what they are supposed to do, the state then reaches its hand in to claw that money back. It prevents people from establishing generational wealth. It makes it hard for them to seek justice because especially when it's the state that is violating their rights. The state tries to seize some of that money back. Money is a very poor substitute for having your rights violated by the state, and for the state to try to get payment back for the very conditions that led to you owing money to the state and the situation where your rights got violated is cruel. It's wrong. It needs to stop. So I encourage you with the suggested changes to move this bill forward.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for all your advocacy, and go Manchester United, right?
Yep.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
We have Corey Mackey, I believe, is in here.
Hello.
Go ahead, please, Ms. Mackey.
Am I? Thank you, Chairman Scanlon and members of the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee. I'm here in support of Senate Bill number 873 with particular focus on the removal of liens on the property of public assistance beneficiaries. I'm the executive director of the Center for Leadership and Justice, home of the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. We first ran into this ridiculous welfare lien issue during our No More Slumlord campaign in Hartford. We successfully compelled HUD to remove 3 contracts worth over $1 million each from slumlords who owned north of 250 units of housing in Hartford. So long story short, residents experienced years of trauma in these conditions. And then after successfully relocating, worked to file a class action lawsuit to seek harms, financial settlement for their harms. Literally within about 72 hours of filing this class action lawsuit, residents received what actually felt like aggressive and threatening letters from the state, telling them that should they be successful with this class action lawsuit, the state would come after them to fulfill their welfare liens. That was our first run-in with it. After doing research, we realized we were only one of 2 states to aggressively use these statutes and realized that it then impacted people, causing them to go into foreclosure. So if someone had a welfare lien, the state would have a lien on their property that was in first position. So even if folks fell behind in their mortgage payments and their lender was willing to modify the loan, the state would often refuse the modification if the lien couldn't be settled. Additionally, I think it's clear that this policy really prevents wealth from being passed on from one generation to the next among low-income families, disproportionately affecting women and families of color. It is just bad policy, morally, economically, ethically, you name it. It does not make sense, which is why we are only one of 2 states in the country that still practices this. Most states abolished it in 1973. The bill as it is written, however, has some concerns. It is including a $250,000 homestead exemption. While there are not a ton of homes above that amount with liens, there certainly are some, and there's no, it's not indexed to inflation or anything else. So as home values rise, more and more folks will get caught in this cycle. But more problematic is the inability for folks to be able to do a loan modification with these liens. So we are asking for all real estate to be exempt from this recovery process, as well as all legal settlements. And we also reject, as Kathy did, any language that expands the state's ability to go after the Department of Corrections liens. This liening process is antiquated and it just needs to end. So with those changes, we fully support this bill, and thank you for your support as well.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Representative Devlin.
Sorry, trying to get off mute. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your testimony. And I do have a question because, again, this is new to me, a new add to a bill that was intended to be about something else, but it's really intriguing. And I've heard about it on the news recently. And I'm hoping maybe you can help understand. And if not, I'm sure it'll come out further in our committee discussions. But, you know, as I understand it, Connecticut and New York are the only 2 states that currently have this lien process in place. And it's always easy to say, well, we're just the only other state, or these states do that. Are there other sort of criteria or, you know, aspects to how other states handle this? Or is it just a clean across the board, no matter what, there's no lien process? You know, how does it work in other states? If you could help me understand that a little bit more, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are, if you get deep into the weeds, you could find, I think, 3 or 4 other states that have some lien process that goes above and beyond what the feds require, but they are for the most minuscule, rarely used, sort of, nothing compares to what Connecticut and New York does across the board. That is completely true. And the best we can tell from our research, especially with Speaker Ritter's office, is that it was clearly just an oversight during some welfare reforms in the 70s that Connecticut did not make these changes. So we cannot find any conversation where there was just a super intentional decision to keep this. And when we ran into it, nobody was aware of it except for the folks at DSS and DAS that implement and execute these. All the lawmakers we've talked to have been shocked to realize that this is going on. And the folks themselves who end up realizing they have liens have no idea because it was in the fine print that they signed, you know, and then 30 years later, they realize they have this and then think they're alone and that this was just sort of a fluke that they didn't understand. So we truly are one of only 2 states that go so far above and beyond what the feds require to claw this back from low-income folks.
Thank you for that explanation. I think this is something that, you know, we really do need to give some serious consideration to. Somebody mentioned earlier, you know, a hand up with our welfare programs, and I think that really is important. And this probably relates to another issue, right, which is the whole cliff. At one point, I was a coach for a nonprofit helping women get back in the workforce and was working really intently with this woman. And finally, she revealed to me that, in fact, if she did get a job, which she didn't want to, she would have to give up her apartment that was free, and then that would cost her more. So there's a lot of issues that we need to tackle, no doubt. And this is one I'm really intrigued with. So thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate it.
And if I may add to your comment, one of the primary victims of this are women who go through divorce and in the divorce settlement get the house, but maybe they were on state assistance in their 20s, go ahead, get ready to sell the house to use that equity and have no idea they have this lien. So they were one of the main folks, at least in a comprehensive study in New York, who fell victim to this over and over again.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate your explanations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And very quick question for you, Corey. I see the bill stipulates that this all has to happen, recognizing certain federal requirements with regard to these benefit programs. Can you help? What does the Fed say? Obviously, if 48 other states are not doing this, there must be minimal requirements. But can you shed some light on that for me, please?
Sure, and this gets beyond my deep expertise, but in the Medicare process, so if you have folks who are in nursing homes or things like that, there are federal reimbursements that have to happen that Connecticut has no jurisdiction right now to just eliminate those. So what we're repealing goes above and beyond what the federal government, so all of our states have those federal requirements. Connecticut goes above and beyond what the other 48 states do in addition to those requirements.
So other states may just be following federal guidance in that if you know, what is it, Title IX, that what you would be, exactly. And you go have to pay that back, but are not looking at those other level, those benefits like housing and SNAP and Husky,
exactly.
Where we're then seeking the money to reimburse the state afterwards.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Ferrara.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Corey. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here to share your perspective and so many perspectives of those who have unfortunately been impacted by this policy. I had a quick question to what you noted is in the language right now, which references around a property being valued at $250,000 or less. Do you have any knowledge of how, if that level exists in other states? I'm just kind of curious about your perspective on this, given that you recommended that we don't use that level.
No, I think this is a case of maybe trying to meet some of the myths that are out there that low-income people are going to, suddenly become rich and have money, and shouldn't there be some point at which they should pay back state assistance? And so the states that don't have it, they don't have it. So this is not a common practice elsewhere. I think the thought was, well, there probably aren't too many homes with $250,000 with liens, so let's just do that. It will cause no harm, when in fact it really does cause a lot of harm, and it does not get at the root of the problem because of the negotiations that have to take place with loan modifications when it comes to foreclosure. And in the state of Connecticut, if you look in, there's a number of towns where you can't find a home on the market for under $250,000. And in 10 years, we have one member we're working with whose home started well below $250,000, located near Yale University. And within a few years, it far exceeded that. And so, and how do we track that? How do we assess that? Like, what goes into place in the state to make sure that we can actually carry that out? It just seems, it just doesn't make sense.
Thanks. So just to clarify, in the other states that we'd be joining, they don't have this level in the way that they implement this.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you so much, Corey.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mackey, for your testimony today. Next up, Tom, who do we have?
Yeah, I believe the next person we have in the room is Andrew Gearing. He is showing up. There he is. Yep.
Hi, good afternoon, Chairman Scanlon, Chairman Fonfara, Representative Cheeseman, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Andrew Gearing. I'm a third-generation New Haven resident, and I work with some of the city and state's most disadvantaged citizens as a public defender. I'm here to express my support for SB 873, and in particular, its provision for a 3-tiered pilot structure. I'm speaking only in my personal capacity. As you've heard today, my city, New Haven, hosts many nonprofit entities, resulting in nearly 60% of the city's property being non-taxable. New Haven hosts both pilot qualifying nonprofit entities, such as universities, hospitals, and state courthouses, prisons, and offices, as well as non-pilot qualifying nonprofit entities, such as museums, theaters, houses of worship, treatment facilities, homeless shelters, and many more. People who live in the mainly white suburbs outside of New Haven spend a lot of time in these tax-free buildings. They are born in New Haven hospitals, receive medical treatment from New Haven doctors, and come to New Haven for theater, concerts, art, and culture. But although people from all over Southern Connecticut benefit from these resources, New Haven residents bear the burden of paying for them. In the shadow of an ivory tower, tens of thousands of New Haven residents cannot access the most basic needs. This is because New Haven taxpayers are massively subsidizing tax-free entities. The chief culprit, of course, is Yale University, a $33 billion, increasingly corporate, increasingly multinational institution. Of the $157 million in taxes that Yale should be paying annually, Yale contributes only a few million. As a result, this year, New Haven faces a $66 million budget deficit and cannot fund its schools, libraries, and other essential public services during a pandemic. Since Yale refuses to pay its fair share, I'm here to ask the state to step up and fill the gap. This is not just a question of municipal equity, it is a question of economic, social, and racial justice. As has always been known, but is finally being said in public, New Haven and the state's other cities suffer from vast inequality resulting from decades of racism, segregation, redlining, and generational poverty. For far too long, the state budget has prioritized Connecticut's wealthier and whiter communities. For far too long, the state has enriched wealthy institutions at the expense of ordinary working people. And for far too long, the state has imposed regressive tax burdens on urban centers and on Black and brown people. Our society will be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members. And this bill is an important step in the direction of creating a more equitable state and society. I strongly urge you to support Senator Looney's tiered pilot legislation and include the necessary funding in this year's budget proposal. Thank you for your time and for your very important work.
Thank you, Mr. Gearing. Any questions for the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next in, we should have Michael Frieda. He is in the room. I don't know if he can hear us, but if you want to skip, we have Leslie Blatou as well.
Mr. First Selectman, are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman Scanlon, and thank you for the time. I'd like to thank you, Chairman Fonfara, and all the members of the committee for the outstanding job you're doing for us here in the state of Connecticut. Most of what I wanted to say has already been spoken about, so I'm going to be very brief. I support SB 873. I support it as 2020's Chairman President of Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. We heard from Mayor Bronin, who succeeded me, and Jamie Stevenson. I supported as this year's chairman of our Regional Council of Governments down here in the South Central region. I see very clearly how important it is to the city of New Haven. And last year, during my term as CCM president, I became very friendly with chief elected officials all over the state, listening to some of the trials and tribulations that they've gone through in past years. On a personal note, I was actually born in the city of New Haven. I grew up in the city of West Haven, and I see very clearly some of the challenges that those two municipalities are faced with. For the town I love today here as First Selectman of North Haven, really this bill does not represent a significant increase for us. In fact, it represents 0.004% of our overall revenue. However, what it does do, it does make us whole for a voluntary pilot payment that we will no longer get from one of our current institutions due to some of the issues there. So I support this for a variety of reasons. And I'm here today to express that support, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman, for being here today and for all you do to represent the colleagues of yours across the state and appearing before us in your capacity in CCM many times. So thank you. Any questions for the First Selectman of North Haven? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Should be Leslie next. Leslie Blatou.
Can you hear me?
Right.
Hi, Ms. Blatou, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Leslie Blateau. I'm a teacher and union member in New Haven Public Schools, longtime city resident, Yale graduate, and parent of a New Haven Public Schools kindergartner. And I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 873, specifically the three-tiered pilot program, and to oppose Governor Lamont's proposed budget that favors our state's wealthiest residents while yet again underfunding the needs of families who live in Connecticut cities. For far too long, the Connecticut narrative pushed by wealthy white suburban elites is that cities like New Haven and their residents just need to make do. As this dangerous narrative goes, if working people and the cities where they live would just budget better, maybe their quality of life would improve. Maybe they wouldn't have so much to complain about. And when Connecticut elites push this narrative year after year, Connecticut cities end up with the persistent state-sponsored underfunding of schools, libraries, nutrition programs, affordable housing, before and after school programs for working families, early childhood programs, parks and rec nature-based opportunities for children, and the list goes on. Connecticut elites love our cities when they need hospitals, college educations, drug treatment programs, museums, theaters, and delicious restaurants. But when it comes to the day-to-day lived experiences of working people, Black and brown families, and city residents, there never seems to be enough resources to go around. We are here today to say enough is enough. We're here to disrupt the dangerous narrative that working people and cities just need to budget better. Connecticut is a very wealthy state with very underfunded programs. This wealth gap, this investment gap, and this judgment gap is impacting children and families in cities like New Haven. Connecticut's pilot program has been historically underfunded and has underserved Connecticut communities. The current pilot structure does not account for discrepancies in need when allocating state funds to municipalities. Under the current system, wealthier cities like Greenwich receive the exact same percentage reimbursement from lost revenue as New Haven. City partners such as Yale and Yale Hospital are unwilling to contribute more to New Haven, a moral failure and a direct contradiction to their supposed values. Time and time again, leaders within these prosperous institutions refuse to support the city that they rely on. Without help from Yale or the state, New Haven will have to raise taxes on financially vulnerable people. It is for these reasons that I support this Senate bill, continue the push to fully fund the pilot program, and urge you to reject the governor's budget for the wealthy and pass a people's budget that benefits the many working people who call this state home. Thank you for your time and your attention to these important matters.
Thank you very much for joining us and testifying today. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you again.
Mr. Jacob should be next. Rich Jacob.
Thank you. Dear Representative Scanlon, Senator Fonfara, and members of the Finance Committee,
Thank you for this opportunity to comment on behalf of Yale University on SB 873, a bill that would, among other provisions, create 3 tiers of grants under Connecticut's Payment in lieu of Taxes program. I am Rich Jacob, Yale's Associate Vice President for Federal and State Relations. I wish to express Yale's strong support for the tiered grant proposal in SB 873. Yale commends the committee for taking up this legislation, which is particularly important for Yale's hometown of New Haven. The university is an economic anchor for New Haven, as well as the state, and the university strives through its voluntary payment to the city, property taxes, permit fees, and other contributions to New Haven Promise, New Haven Works, and other programs to improve the quality of life and economic opportunity in New Haven. The pilot program is a vital source of aid to cities and towns across Connecticut. It addresses the structural financial challenges faced by cities and towns across the state. The pilot program serves to diversify the revenue sources for towns and cities, enabling them to receive a share of statewide revenue sources that are more diverse than local sources, which consist predominantly of property taxes. It also acknowledges the public good that nonprofit entities create, not just locally, but across the state. SB 873 would prioritize grants to cities and towns with the least ability to raise revenue when there are insufficient appropriations to fund the pilot grants fully. This approach would significantly reduce operating deficits in those cities and towns, enabling municipal leaders, together with their community partners, to focus their efforts on strategic programs and investments to grow existing companies, create new businesses, and develop more vibrant and inclusive local economies. It is equally important that the General Assembly allocate enough resources to fund the private pilot program fully. The tiered program will be helpful, and it should be accompanied by action to allocate enough resources to provide the full statutory grant to cities and towns. Thank you for this opportunity to express Yale's support for SB 873, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rich. Good to see you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have Jay Kelly next.
Hello. My name is Jill Kelly. I am a resident of North Haven, and I'm one of those suburban residents who benefit from all of the resources available in my nearest city, New Haven. In particular, I'm a parent of children in the New Haven Public Schools. I've also been a volunteer with New Haven Public School Advocates, and as a volunteer, I served as co-chair of the New Haven Public Schools Budget Deficit Mitigation Committee. Now notice that NHPS is so strapped or so thrifty that we had an amateur volunteer committee of parents and staff, rather than a paid consultant to make recommendations on deficit mitigation strategies. Our committee had the opportunity to examine NHPS's spending and make recommendations for savings that might help close our annual deficit. We did not uncover shocking levels of waste. Rather, we saw the results of years of cuts, clever thrift, trade-offs, and sacrifices, to the point where finding further things to cut without further harming student education is now very difficult. Sadly, implementing all of our recommendations would still not be sufficient to close the full budget deficit that persists at this level of bare bones operation. Never mind approach educational equity by adding new programs, equipment, or staff to fully support students' learning needs. Therefore, our committee added a recommendation for full funding of education to be assessed by an independent education cost study. And that is a recommendation more directed to the state rather than to our local Board of Education, Board of Alders, or district personnel. I support Bill 873, except perhaps that the reimbursement for the top tier should be guaranteed at that full 77%. The governor's budget unconscionably expects to forego the next step in phasing in full ECS funding for schools. And the City of New Haven's deficit suggests that no more local school funding will be possible. Full pilot funding would make a great difference to education in New Haven and throughout the state. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for testifying and for sharing that perspective. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much.
The next person that I have in the list is Sarah White. If I don't see Matt Hoey and Harold Brooks, I might have missed them, but I don't see them yet. So the next person I have is Sarah White.
Thank you, Co-Chair Scanlon and the other members of the committee. My name is Sarah White, and I'm an attorney with the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, where I focus on foreclosure prevention. I'm here today in support of SB 873 as it relates to the limitation of welfare liens. It would bring Connecticut in line with the 48 other states that no longer treat public assistance as a debt. I've submitted written testimony that explains why this poverty tax has been so damaging, especially for homeowners who are facing foreclosure or who need to refinance. And I'm going to focus my testimony here today on just a couple of ways that we can strengthen the bill, which are the same ones that Corey Mackey mentioned. So first, the bill would still allow liens on homes valued at $250,000 or higher. And we ask that there be no more liens on real property, regardless of their value, because the mere existence of a DSS lien has caused our clients to lose or almost lose their homes to foreclosure. And this is because the state, as a policy, usually will not subordinate its liens so that folks can get a loan modification without requiring significant payment. One of our clients lost her home and became homeless because there was a DSS lien that the state would not subordinate, even though she was eligible for a loan modification. And even though she ended up losing her home, the state did not get a single dollar from her as recovery for state assistance. We had another client who was told by DSS he would have to pay $25,000 just to subordinate the lien, which was more than he was behind on his mortgage and money he obviously could not afford. DSS liens also mean that people can never build equity in their homes and any sort of cushion to get through hard times. I think it's important to note that these liens can be very large, high five figures, even into the six figures, especially if they're to recover state medical insurance. And home equity, we know, is the major driver of the racial wealth gap, which DSS liens perpetuate. And finally, as has been pointed out, the $250,000 limit is also unwieldy and would not help out people in the more expensive parts of our state where you just cannot get a family home under that amount. We also suggest eliminating liens on lawsuit settlements and judgments. This is money to compensate people for concrete losses, so things like medical bills, past or expected, or lost earnings over a lifetime, and it's inequitable for the state to take half of this. And then finally, we agree with the ACLU that the language in Section 2 should be removed. That seems to expand the state's ability to recover costs of incarceration. So if anyone has any questions for me, and I thank you so much for considering this bill.
Thank you, Attorney White. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
I don't know if you've seen is Matt Hoey or Harold Brooks here yet or no? No, if not, Allison Weir is here.
Good morning, Chairman Scanlon, Chairman Fonfara, and the rest of the members of the Finance Committee. My name is Allison Weir. I'm a staff attorney and policy advocate with Greater Hartford Legal Aid. And I'm here on behalf of GHLA, New Haven Legal Assistance Association, and Connecticut Legal Services to urge the committee to enact Section 2 of SB 873 concerning the removal of liens on property of public assistance beneficiaries. I've submitted written testimony, so I really just simply want to enforce what a lot of my fellow legal colleagues have spoken earlier about the importance of removing property liens as a way of building wealth and reducing the intergenerational wealth gap we have currently. And I would also like to amend my testimony to endorse the recommendations of Sarah White, who just spoke earlier, Corey McKay, and Kathy Flaherty, to remove the limit of $250,000 on property value. It really is, in Connecticut, it's basically unworkable. There's so few, even if you are able to find a property under $250,000, it doesn't get to the question of equity. So you could have a fairly expensive, you could have a house and have very little equity and have all of it taken away, even if it's only like is in excess of $250,000. Property liens really discourage families from building wealth and aggravating, and they aggravate the extreme wealth disparity here in the state. If we're serious about assistance being a help rather than a hindrance to families in need, we should remove the threat of that families are able to escape poverty and build wealth, that they would lose their foothold into the middle class by eliminating the property lien. If the committee has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for being with us today. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Heiklis Wilms. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, but
Thank you. You said it right. It's Heiklis, but the last name is Williams with an A, not an E.
got it. Apologize.
Okay. Thank you guys for all the good work you're doing. I appreciate the effort that everyone is putting out to pass this bill. My name is Heiklis Williams. I'm the president for AFSCME Local 3429, which represents paraprofessionals, Head Start and school readiness head teachers, as well as some support staff employed by the City of New Haven Board of Education. This group of workers are mainly women of color that do not earn livable wages. As a matter of fact, we're among the lowest paid in the city. This is a situation I inherited about a year ago when I was elected president of this union with a goal to make a difference. I'm in support of this bill, the SB 873, because New Haven is facing a big budget deficit, which means we will face higher taxes and increase in the cost to cover our basic necessities such as housing and utility bills, and continue to rely on state assistance to survive the high cost of living we face in New Haven. We should not have to work to educate our youngsters and at the same time live in poverty. There is some serious inequities in the way our city is funded by the state compared to cities with predominantly white residents and those of higher social economic standards. New Haven residents are a backbone of the support of this state, but does not reap the benefits it deserves, primarily because Yale eats up a lot of the real estate and the tax exempt on most of the property and the tax exempt on most of their properties. Despite many efforts to get Yale to contribute more to New Haven, it has fallen on deaf ears. Without substantial funding from the pilot program that equates a fair calculation of the accounts of grants in lieu of tax paid to municipalities, New Haven will face even more deficit, which will have a negative impact on our city. This will in turn be detrimental to the youngsters and our seniors and the future of the state of Connecticut on a whole. I can see from the testimonies today that this group cares about solving the racial and socioeconomic divide that we are facing in the city. And I encourage you to support this bill and to make sure New Haven get as much as it can, that it can possibly get. I just want to thank you and appreciate you taking the time to listening to my speech today.
Appreciate you taking the time to be here. So thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony today.
No problem. Thank you.
I have Justin Elliker next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for all the work that you're doing and for the opportunity to testify today. Chairs Fonfara and Scanlon and Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman, and members of the committee. I'm, of course, here also to testify in favor of Senate Bill 873 to create 3 need-based tiers within the pilot program. And I want to cover a couple areas of why this is so important, not just for New Haven, but for the state. This is by far the most important piece of legislation contemplated this session, in my view. And it's not only the highest legislative priority of the city of New Haven, but it's essential to the economic vitality of many other communities and the well-being of our state. 27 of my counterparts joined me in a letter to the governor to stress the importance of this proposal in getting desperately needed funds to the communities that need them most. Those leaders were bipartisan. They consisted of 16 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 2 town managers. They were from every corner of our state, from rural towns and suburbs to cities large and small. You've already heard from many of them today, and you also, I know a number of them provided written testimony as well. Nearly every member of this committee represents a municipality that will directly benefit from this proposal. And every one of you represents residents who will indirectly benefit from the positive impact it'll have on our state. The situation in our city and many other towns and cities in Connecticut is dire. In New Haven, 60% of our property is non-taxable. Think about that, 60%. So 40% of our city pays 100% of the real estate taxes. And unlike nearly every other state, in Connecticut, the state requires municipalities to be over-reliant on property taxes. Pilot, as we all know, was meant to rectify that situation, but over the last 2 decades, everyone's share of pilot funding has gone down consistently. Meanwhile, the percentage of New Haven non-taxable property has gone up. And this has contributed to an increasingly challenging financial situation for our city, putting pressure on our ability to provide the very basic services that our residents and taxpayers need. In our last budget, I eliminated over 100 positions and still had to raise taxes. And looking forward, each year is worse. In next year's budget, we're facing a $66 million deficit, $66 million just to do things how we are currently doing them. And of course, we all know we need to do much more. To put that in perspective, our entire police force budget is $43 million. 2 things I want to underscore that I think are important. First, this is a moral question. People in our state are talking a lot about systemic racism and inequality. And if we truly believe Black and brown residents ought to have the same access to services as white residents, then we shouldn't make it near impossible for struggling communities to survive. In New Haven, we can't even fund basic services, not because we're incompetent or wasteful, but because we don't have enough revenue and aren't able to collect it because of these limitations. If our state wants safe streets and well-funded schools, a robust economy, we've got to make sure that we allow cities to collect revenue or make up for it when they can't. And the second is a really practical question. What do we think will happen if the city of New Haven ceases to be an economic engine in our state? How are we supposed to attract new residents when our cities are increasingly unaffordable? How are we supposed to keep businesses and jobs if we have property taxes continue to skyrocket? The annual cost of this proposal pales in comparison to the tax revenue it would generate if we chose to invest in our cities and help them build out of this pandemic stronger than before. The bill will be transformative. Haven't we talked about pilot funding for years? Now is the time for you all to do the right thing, to stabilize struggling towns and cities and make a statement about what our priorities are, to do what's in the best interest of the entire state. Thank you, everyone, and I strongly encourage you to support this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question from Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mayor Elicker, for testifying. We can clearly see that pilot is not working, and there needs to be something done in order to make municipalities who have these non-taxable properties whole. So what is your current budget, Mr. Mayor, for the city of New Haven?
It's around $600 million.
600, so it's a little bit more than Hartford in
Correct.
itself. And you say that you're going to be operating at a $66 million deficit. What's your plans on trying to rectify that?
Well, so we can't operate under a $66 million deficit. I have to deliver a balanced budget to the Board of Alders. And as I suggested, if we cut $66 million from our current expenses, the police budget is $43 million. Our entire library budget is $4 million. Our youth budget is $4 million. We just cannot cut that amount. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to use financial gimmicks like have often been done by many, many municipalities. And we've also run out of the options there. So that's looking at above a 20% tax increase if we actually were to swallow that kind of gap.
Just 2 other questions. So you say that 60% of your properties are non-taxable. If we did fund you entirely through the original pilot program, how much revenue would that be?
Around $180 million. And
you would have more than enough to pay for your services.
Correct. Currently, we get around $41 million. And to Representative Scanlon's question that was much earlier on about our liabilities. So one of our biggest drivers of our deficit right now is pensions, and that is significantly increasing every year. Our liabilities for our pensions are around unfunded liabilities are around $900 million. And so when you think if we were fully funded each year at that $180 million level, we're currently at 41, we would much more easily be able to fund basic services that we cannot deliver, in my view now already, and significantly reduce that unfunded liability to get us on a more sustainable path.
Did you say your unfunded is 900 million?
Correct.
So you got
That's
the
an
same
approximate
problem.
number.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
That's an approximate number.
Approximate. So you have the same problem that the state of Connecticut has with its unfunded liability. It's the elephant.
Yes.
It's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Correct. However, I would categorize it differently because the state of Connecticut has many more mechanisms to collect revenue than we do as a city.
One last question. You said that if we would be able to, or you would be able to make up the difference in, I guess, allowing you to raise your own revenue. Any suggestions?
I think there's a lot. When we look at other states, there's a potential for income tax. So we talked earlier, you all asked questions about MRSA and the sales tax revenue that was supposed to be redirected towards municipalities. Most states have a strong county government and larger areas of municipalities so that there's more of the suburban areas that pay into the overall services for the city. There's many ways that we could approach this if the state allowed us to. Currently, the state ties one arm behind our back and asks us to do about 10 times the amount of services that the suburbs do. And that's just not a recipe for anyone's success. I mean, we have 33,000 suburban residents coming into the city every day. We are not just the economic engine of this area, but we're all connected. And it's vital that we ensure that the state allows our cities to succeed, which it currently is not doing.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to ask you to underscore something that you just talked about because I think it's important for the committee to recognize. You would not have to be thinking about alternative revenue sources if you were able to get a fully funded pilot payment, because it seems like even in this crisis that you're in with a $60 million budget deficit, even if you were to be fully funded, 3 times over would take care of that extraordinary deficit, let alone the needs that you would need to be meeting and doing more, to your point about the fact that there are a lot more needs to be met beyond your current budgeting capacity. So I'm just wondering if you can go over those numbers one more time, because I think it's staggering to think about what that would mean for you and every other city if you were just getting what you were promised.
So if a pilot were at the fully funded level, New Haven would receive $182 million a year. Currently, we receive 41.6, and so we would not need another revenue source if pilot were fully funded. And I wanted to underscore something that I hear a lot, that somehow large municipalities are mismanaged or wasteful with with the funds that we do have. And I've been mayor for a little bit over a year and have seen enough to know that that is just not true. And to make a comparison, the starting salary of a police officer in New Canaan is $70,000. Starting salary of a police officer in New Haven is $50 million. New Canaan has defined benefit programs. We have defined benefit programs. I can guarantee you that an officer that retires in New Canaan has a much larger pension than our officers in New Haven. We are not wasting, and our officers in New Haven, I'm sure New Canaan officers are doing a lot of work, but our officers in New Haven are doing a very, very difficult job. We are using our funding very, very efficiently, and the state is getting a lot of value over the efficient funds that we are spending in New Haven. Our problem is a revenue problem. We are not able to collect enough revenue to ensure the basic services that our residents and the suburban towns deserve.
Thank you, Mayor. Representative Chafee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor Elicker, for providing the testimony today. So you said that 60% of the property is untaxable, correct?
Correct.
What percentage of that is Yale University and Yale Hospital Network?
The vast majority. I don't have an exact percent, but if Yale were to pay taxes on that, it would be $167 million additional revenue for the city. Yale currently gives a $13 million voluntary payment to the city.
Their voluntary payment is 13 million.
Correct.
And their tax bill would be 167 million.
Correct.
Thank you for the information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for Mayor Elicker from the committee? Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your testimony today. And it just raised a couple of questions for me. Clearly there seems to be, from what we've heard today, a real love-hate relationship with Yale in New Haven, right? That it doesn't pay property taxes, yet it is a huge driver for people to go to the city, to go to the restaurants, that pay the parking, that, do all of those things. And yes, of course, there are services associated with running the city, but what makes it desirable, as you said, 33,000 people come into the city, is to hopefully spend money, at events, at businesses, and all of that. This proposal, it's an interesting bill before us, because as I've mentioned before, it was intended to do one thing, and now it has two other pieces. One, which is for the state to not collect money, and the other is to have the state give more money away. So it's a bit of a conundrum. And funding pilot, I think, is really, really important. And it's based on really the priorities that our state government puts in place in terms of the monies that will be allotted. One of the things that can also help our cities and our towns is added, as the governor, I think, said he wants more taxpayers. And it's not just residents, but hopefully it's businesses and corporations that will come to our state, that will provide good paying jobs, that make philanthropic contributions to the communities in which they reside, and that generally also encourage their employees to give back in terms of time and other contributions. So does New Haven have a concerted effort, and maybe it's through DECD, because I mentioned earlier, right, it was the priority of the governor at least a year ago. We hasn't talked about it much lately, and also our commissioner at DECD, who I hold in high regard, to make our urban centers a priority. But is there anything happening to encourage businesses, large businesses? We have a lot of small businesses, and that's great, but that could offer that employment, that could help offset some of the non-tax properties, that could bring more opportunity and not, and alleviate some of the pressure on our cities.
Sure, and I'm glad you brought up that question, because I think it's vital to this question in front of us. Of course, in New Haven, we're working hard to attract more businesses. I think there's an intellectual inconsistency when we insist we're not going to raise taxes at the state level, because it forces me to raise taxes dramatically in our city. And that is, as we all know, a significant impediment to us attracting more businesses to our cities. And in addition to the fact that I can't possibly cover this deficit because of years and years of underfunding in cities, we're looking at our 6th homicide already this year. I would prefer that we spend more money on job training programs, on our education program, that we do on the correctional facilities in this state, that you do as a state on our correctional facilities. If we actually invested in our urban centers, so we could fund a librarian in every school. I can't even fund a librarian in every school in every school in New Haven. If we actually invested in our cities, we would allow our communities to be more stable, to be thriving taxpayers, to be part of the community, and would allow ourselves to keep our taxes more in line to attract more businesses.
Thank you for that. And no doubt this is a a complex situation that all of our cities face, but I do believe it is in the interest of all of us across the state to try to support ways to help our urban centers become more desirable, more successful, safer, all of those things. So I do appreciate your time today, and thanks for addressing my question.
Thank you. And I just wanted to highlight that it's not just New Haven that benefits from this, of course. Hampton gets $3 million additional, West Haven 1.8, East Lyme 100,000, Bristol 460,000. There's many communities across the state that are struggling in different ways.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Fonfara, followed by Representative Lamar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mayor. I'm listening to your testimony and certainly of Mayor Bronin before you and Senator Looney, the author of this legislation, this part of it. And it just seems to me that obviously representing Hartford, but also as chair of this committee, recognizing the need of many cities and towns throughout the state. Fortunately, not all. Good for them, but an increasing number of suburban towns moving into that what I call that canary in the coal mine, 40 mills or what have you. And if you recall Mayor Bronin's testimony about the Boston Fed's report of some years ago now, and we updated it last year, a year and a half ago, of a need capacity gap, an increasing number of towns, suburban towns, moving from one side of that continuum to the other, and not being able to meet their basic needs adequately without raising a mill rate, which then drives people out who have the ability to choose where they want to live. Creating more have-nots than haves. But we passed a few years ago the MRSA program, and I just asked the staff while you were speaking what New Haven would receive under that, fully funded. And by the way, the governor has proposed to suspend that program from fully funded, being funded in his budget. New Haven would receive $53 million under that, fully funded. Hartford, $45 million, and virtually every town receives something under that, in many a very needed revenue source that it's not getting today. But it will be a challenge. Just like this proposal will be a challenge because the state has this insatiable appetite to own every dime that it raises, unlike most states in this country that share some revenue, sales tax. New York State allows counties to have up to 4% of their sales tax, and nobody ever questions it. There's never a move to pull that back. Every dime that we ever give from the state to you, we have a string attached to it, and it's made out of metal, and we make sure that we can pull it back when we need it, and we do. Our credibility on this issue is virtually zero. I hate to say that to you, but it's true. And I want to believe that this proposal will be different, that we will find the revenue to fund it in the manner that you have an expectation to realize, and the mayor of Hartford and the mayor and the first selectmen that have testified here today as well. But even if we do that, what confidence do you have that that will be sustained? And until we change our ways as a legislature and as a state, as an executive branch as well, and I would say even more importantly, then we're not credible. And our actions, our representations are not credible. So I say that, and I'm saying as a legislator, I say that. And so we have a responsibility to not only address the needs that your city has and others in other towns in Connecticut, but to do that in a way that is sustained and that you can count on revenue coming into you, not one time and then gradually reducing it or suspending it because our almighty budget, which we think once we balance our budget. We've done our job. The state is in great shape. And I know you know that's not the case. And I want to believe that most people on this committee believe that is not the case as well. But you can comment on that if you want, but I just wanted to put that in front of you as a reality of how the state of Connecticut behaves as it relates to revenue. It is much different than most of the rest of the country.
Thank you, Senator. I think the only comment I would add is that now is a real opportunity, especially, I mean, in times of crisis, there's an opportunity to make significant change. We're talking about income inequality. The impacts of COVID have exposed that. And now's an opportunity for us together to make a very significant impact in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lamar.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator Fonfara did a better job than I will. Largely, his point was going to be the point of my question, which is largely the job of being a mayor or first selectman in Connecticut is substantially harder than it is in almost any other state in the country. It's substantially harder to be the mayor of a 130,000 person town like New Haven, or of a 17,000 person community like many of our surrounding suburbs, largely for the reasons that Senator Fonfara just highlighted. Every aspect of your governance is dictated by what the state provides you with resources for. We hold you to a standard to provide those services that are almost unattainable without our support, and yet we fail to provide the support. And we fail to allow regional consideration of these issues. We fail on regional tax sharing or sales tax revenue. So you're put in this position. And frankly, cities like New Haven, cities like Hartford, were beating this drum decades ago that we have a growing crisis in our reliance on the property tax and it being the sole source of revenue by which we provide all these services. We've been beating that drum for a very long time. Now you start to see more first selectmen and mayors from smaller communities also jumping on board saying, oh yeah, right, this reliance on the property tax is hurting us now too. And so we have a growing coalition of folks who understand the impact that we're facing. Some of us are at the vanguard of that concern though, and the impact is very direct, it's very meaningful, and it's very much right now. And I appreciate that we've got this consideration of the bill before us. I appreciate your leadership on this issue. And I know it's hard to come here as a mayor of a city and say we need help and we need support, but I thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Representative Lamar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mayor, for joining us today.
Good to see you all. Thanks for your work.
Tom, who do we have next?
Yeah, we have First Selectman Hoey. Going back on that list, he has shown up.
Thank you. Let me unmute. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, members of the committee. I'm Matt Hoy, First Selectman of the town of Guilford, a community that is proud of its native son, Chairman Scanlon, for the great work he is doing for the town he grew up in and the state in general. I speak to you today in strong support of Senate Bill 873, which creates 3 need-based tiers within the pilot formula. It also provides the necessary funding to make it possible. For many communities in our state, this is desperately needed aid. Despite the fact that Guilford, who currently does not receive any pilot funding for state, college, and hospital-owned property, will most likely not financially benefit from this legislation. We understand that regionally, we are all in this together, and what is good for many of our cities and towns is good for us all. Our urban centers provide access to vital services such as health, educational, social, cultural, and jobs for the broader region. And yet, they do not see adequate reimbursement for the loss of revenue from non-taxable property. My community benefits from our proximity to our neighbor, New Haven, and we should be ensuring that they have the resources they need to run their government and essential programs effectively in order to provide services for their residents as well as the region at large. It should not be solely on their residents and taxpayers to cover the cost benefiting the broader region. This additional and tiered funding will take some of that burden off of them. Connecticut's path to economic prosperity can only be achieved by ensuring that our cities are strong and financially sound. For the well-being of us all, it is essential to ensure that all our neighboring towns and cities remain strong despite these serious and challenging times. Additionally, if we are to recover from the pandemic, we need to do it together by supporting each other. I join you today because this is good public policy, and it will help our urban centers, my community, and our entire state in becoming a more equitable and prosperous place. Thank you for considering my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman, and for the nice shout out. Certainly appreciate that. Any questions from the committee? I would just say, Matt, I know you've been in and out at other meetings, but I had testified, or I talked when Mayor Bronin was testifying about how the fact that from suburban towns like Guilford to Hartford to New Haven, there is an emerging consensus that this has to get done. And I'm just glad to hear you saying that you support this today and standing with this group as we try to help these cities and towns all across Connecticut.
Thank you, Sean.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
I guess our esteemed co-chairman is going to be taking a well-deserved break. Thank you, Sean, very much for taking on this responsibility so well. So at this point, Kelsey Steele, I understand, is up next, and you have the floor, sir.
All right, thank you so much to the distinguished chairman and the committee members. I'm Pastor Kelsey G.L. Steele, and I'm in strong support of Senate Bill 873 to create a 3 needed base tier within the pilot formula and provide the necessary funding to make it possible. The city of New Haven has been hit badly during COVID-19, but we were struggling long before the pandemic. Children attend underfunded schools. Our public works department is stretched thin. Our police force has continued to get smaller, and many of our residents live paycheck to paycheck in deep intergenerational poverty. We also pay one of the highest property tax rate in Connecticut, but with nearly 60% of our property being non-taxable, it is impossible to adequately fund services that will provide for the needs of our residents. Pilot was designed to address this and yet have never come close to full funding. Further still, we've seen our share of the funds go down over time. And typically the city has been funded between 35 to 38% of our statutory reimbursement for college and hospitals pilot, which makes up the grand share of our non-taxable property. Our funding have fallen below 25%, and this is not sustainable. This legislation would change that, bringing our reimbursement to 50% of funding and putting us on track to physical stability. New Haven is a vital city and play a critical part in the economic and cultural vitality of our state. If New Haven does not receive these funds, we will face skyrocketing property tax hikes on some of the state's poorest residents and reduce our workforce even further, meaning people will be paying increasingly more for less. Connecticut cannot recover without a strong economic recovery in New Haven, and these funds will allow us to do just that. I will stress that these dollars have critical importance, not just to our city, but to communities around the state and to the economic well-being of all Connecticut residents. I urge you to support this funding. It will benefit our over 1,000 parishioners on Dixwell Avenue in the city of New Haven. And this is respectfully submitted to you, Pastor Kelsey G.L. Steele. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pastor, very much for your testimony and being willing to be here today to give us your perspective. Are there questions? Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Pastor Steele, for testifying. Just one quick question. We heard today that 60% of properties in New Haven are non-taxable, and the majority of that is Yale specifically. Do you think we ought to be taxing Yale?
I absolutely do. and I am a strong advocate that Yale pay their share and become good neighbors. Although they're doing a lot of good things in the community, I feel that New Haven would benefit more if they would pay their taxes, and it would eliminate a lot of our deficit.
Yeah, I think, okay. Thank you, Pastor Steele, for testifying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else? Seeing none. Thank you, Pastor Steele.
Thank you.
Next up is, hopefully I pronounced his name properly, Josh Powlick.
Yes, thank you, Senator Fonfara and Representative Scanlon and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to testify briefly in support of Senate Bill 873. I'm Reverend Josh Powlick. We say Powlick like a dog licks its paw. I'm the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Society East in Manchester. I'm a clergy leader with the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance, or GIA, and a resident of Glastonbury. I want to focus my remarks on the abolition of welfare liens. It is not well known, as others have testified today, that the state of Connecticut claws back millions of dollars in public assistance funds annually from former recipients who are attempting to make their way out of poverty. At GIA, none of us was aware of this practice until residents of the Barbara Gardens apartment complex in Hartford were on the road to winning a class action suit against their landlord for code violations, and they were immediately informed by the state that it would be claiming a significant percentage of their settlement money. Corey Mackey mentioned this earlier on. Since that moment, I've heard many, many more stories of low-income working class people attempting to make their way out of poverty, only to discover that they owe tens of thousands of dollars to the state to pay back public assistance money they received earlier in their life, a period of great need. Such practices send many hard-working people back into poverty. Some of the most vulnerable targets of welfare liens are single women who receive a house as part of their divorce settlement. They had received public assistance at an earlier time in their lives. When they go to sell the home or refinance their mortgage, they find that the state has placed a lien on their property. Whatever equity they thought they had suddenly vanishes. People who thought they were climbing out of poverty suddenly realize they are right back where they started. And it really is sudden. Nobody is aware that these liens have been placed, and the news is always shocking. That's always a part of the story. Sending formerly impoverished people back into poverty makes no sense. Not only is it bad economic policy, it is also morally unconscionable and cruel. We need to stop balancing the state budget on the backs of poor people. I urge you all to support Senate Bill 873 with the same modifications Corey Mackey, Sarah White, Allison Weir, and others discussed earlier. Remove all existing real estate liens, eliminate the use of real estate liens entirely moving forward, and exempt all legal settlements. So, for example, if someone wins payment for medical bills and they have to fork that back over to the state, again, it's just unconscionable that practice happens. It's time to end it. Thank you for supporting this bill, and I want to also say thank you for a very well-run hearing. This is one of the best hearings and the quickest hearings I've ever been part of, and I appreciate it. It makes the government more accessible to more people if it can be done this way.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And thank you for waiting to testify here today. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next up is Rahul Shah.
That's right. Hi, good afternoon, respected members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Rahul Shah. I'm a New Haven resident who works in Hartford as a physician. I'm speaking in support of SB 873. Connecticut is just one of two states that can raise liens against those who have required cash assistance. This contributes to ongoing poverty cycles and can have a damaging impact to our state's families. SB 873 would remove such provisions and help these families escape poverty. Connecticut cities have plenty to offer, but are underfunded due in part to the large proportion of their properties that are not taxable. The repercussions of this disproportionately burdens households of lower income. Fully funding the pilot program would seek to equalize this current discrepancy through state funding and would translate to better infrastructure for our cities and services for our state's residents. These enhancements would benefit the entire state and promote ongoing growth and equitable opportunity. I encourage you to vote in support of Senate Bill 873. I'd be happy to field any questions. You have the opportunity to promote long-term growth in Connecticut. I hope that you do so. Thank you all.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, excuse me a second here while I get my list, is Daniel Del Prete. Is Daniel here?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Daniel Del Prete, Vice President of Local 825 New Haven Firefighters, and I'm here in strong support of Senate Bill 873 to create 3 tier-based needs with the pilot formula and provide the necessary funding to make it possible. As a member of the New Haven Fire Department and taxpayer in both the city of New Haven and state of Connecticut, I feel programs like these benefit not only the city, but also the state as a whole. The NHFD not only protects the residents of New Haven, but also the travelers from this state, region, country, and all over the globe who visit it to experience New Haven's uniqueness. To believe that New Haven taxpayers alone can carry that burden is far too great a task. As Vice President of Local 825, I can assure you that the membership is committed to keeping everyone in this city safe at all times and being prepared for anything that occurs. To be an all-hazards response department takes not only a tremendous amount of training and skills, but funding to operate and maintain the tools needed. The fire department is the busiest department in the state, and our apparatus and tools are in constant need of maintenance and repair. These funds would enable the city to maintain and extend the life, not only of our items, but also maintain the regional training academy located within New Haven. We're simply one part of a puzzle that it takes to operate New Haven and the surrounding region. The thought of asking solely the residents to carry this burden is not fair when you consider the demands of the department and the regional services we provide as well. Pilot was designed to address this, but New Haven's reimbursement has gone down year after year. We as a state need to preserve all cities with this legislation. The cities are what fuel the suburbs in this great state and beyond. Without the cities, we lose the infrastructure to fuel the business, culture, and diversity that keep Connecticut thriving. The right thing to do is to share the burden cast on cities with these non-taxable properties to secure the safety and stability of our great cities here in Connecticut. This legislation would do just that. New Haven is a strong city at the gateway to New England. We have so much to offer and have room for tremendous growth to benefit not only this city, but the state and region as a whole. New Haven hosts a seaport, airport, train terminal, and highways reaching for thousands of miles. If New Haven does not receive these funds, we will face skyrocketing property tax hikes on some of the state's poorest residents and reduce our workforce even further, meaning people will be paying increasingly more for less. The impact of these catastrophic changes will not solely be felt by the Elm City alone, but spread throughout the state and the Northeast as well. Connecticut cannot recover without a strong economic recovery in New Haven and these other cities, and these funds will allow us to do just that. I will stress that these dollars have critical importance, not just to our city, but to communities around the state and to the economic well-being of all Connecticut residents. I urge you to support this funding. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Del Prete? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony. Next up, Rodney Williams. Is Rodney here? There you. I don't see Rodney. Rodney Williams. Okay. Michael Piscatelli.
Hello. Hello.
There's Rodney. Michael, do you mind waiting a moment as Rodney?
Of course, go right ahead, Senator.
Thank you. Rodney, you have the floor.
Yes, can you hear me, sir?
We can, yes.
Yes, how you doing? First of all, I appreciate the fact being given the opportunity to testify. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. My name is Rodney Williams. I'm a resident of Ward 21, is the Dixwell and New Hallville community of New Haven. I'm in support of the bill too. I also just want to speak on behalf of the impact of the lack of the funding to the pilot, how it how it impacts, how it helps with the erosion of the Black community. I listened to a lot of y'all talk about how we should do the right thing, but this has been going on for years. For years, New Haven has been underfunded. If you look right now with the virus, the impact in the state of Connecticut, most people who get sick, they come in where? They come into New Haven. You look at the opioids, all the services. New Haven is a service city for New Haven County, and the residents of New Haven, most of the taxable property that's worth the most money, they got prime locations and they're not being taxed. I can't imagine, I can't even tell you the number of how many people in Newhallville, their cars got booted, got taken for couldn't pay taxes. This isn't fair when you talk about giving people second chances. You know, the truth is we never got a first chance. The first chance is a proper education. We're not getting educated properly because we're not getting funded. When you sit and you listen to Yale say that what's good for New Haven is good for Yale. So the erosion of this city, is that good for Yale? Because the only one growing in the city is them. So as we fall apart, they just keep taking more and more and more. And it's not right. I'm not saying that there aren't issues that need to be addressed in New Haven financially, because I feel that they are too. But I just feel like Yale, although they give us what they give us, look at them as a fruit tree. We're getting the low hanging fruit. The jobs that are worth the most money, the people from the suburbs get them. The jobs that we do in the city, they're not remote jobs. We have residents that are going to the hospital that are actually getting the virus and dying from this. So everybody say that Yale contributes so much. Yeah, but the jobs that we're getting, our lives in danger. I just think they need to do more. It's a virus. They need to do more. The county, they need to do more. What's going on in New Haven is unfair. It ain't right. And I just feel like even now with testifying, take 3 hours for somebody to speak. I watched everybody come up here. I have not seen one resident from the city of New Haven that I know. Make it accessible for us to tell you how we feel. Because the truth is this, if you have a conscience and you hear how we feel, that might change how you vote. And the Democratic Party need to understand one thing. The governor came to New Haven so many times. The big cities put people in the governorship, and then after they get there, look what they do to us. So I'm saying to everybody who's listening, wake up. Don't keep bringing us somebody to promise us stuff. And here we are right now where we are, okay? What you supposed to do.
Rodney.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I just say that we try our best to make this process as democratic and small d and as accessible. This pandemic has done one thing that is positive, with all the misery and all the death and all the issues that how it's affected our economy. One thing that it's done in our process is allowed us to present the opportunity to testify no matter where you are, from your home, from your car, from a phone, as you have on Zoom, across our state. You don't have to come to the Capitol. You can't come to the Capitol, frankly, right now. And I anticipate that this process will continue even when we're back in the Capitol in the LOB, that people will be able to testify if they're infirmed, if they don't have a vehicle to get to the Capitol, or they're working, or they just choose not to come to the Capitol for whatever reason. This process is available to everyone. It's democratic. In all my years in the legislature, it doesn't get any better than this. Now, does that mean everyone knows about it? We try our best to communicate that message. Certainly, Rodney, you have the ability to reach people that some of us may not. We hope you will do that. The more engaged folks are in the process, the better our system is, or better our democracy is. Are there questions for Mr. Williams? Seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. I see Senator Cassano raised his hand. You have a question, Senator? You're still on mute. There you are.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Fonfara. The testimony has been terrific, first of all. I want to go back. I'll go back 10 years. It was more than 10 years ago where I had submitted, I wasn't in the legislature, but I had asked for additional funds, a local sales tax. And the reason I asked for a local sales tax at that period of time, and I still think we need it, is that what you said earlier was extremely online, in that the money that's raised by the cities and towns, it doesn't get back to the cities and towns. A bill like this, people think it's a big city bill. It's not a big city bill. The reason I wanted a local sales tax is because we are a city that the surrounding towns depend on. And I'm in Manchester. Manchester's not one of the 5 largest cities, but Manchester is where you go if you want to go to the community college, if you need to go to the hospital, if you need a job, bus line, services, social services, court, all those kinds of things. And there are Manchesters, there are probably 15 or 20 Manchesters around the state of Connecticut that are much smaller than the largest cities, but provide those same services on a more local basis. And without the ability to bring in the revenues that they need, you rely on your taxpayers, just like New Haven, Hartford, and everything. And I stress this because this is a bill that affects everybody. The smallest of towns, because those smaller towns, they may not go into the big city, but they go to a mid-sized city. And the loss is the same for the mid-sized city. So the beauty of this bill is that it affects the 169 cities and towns in one way or another, but in a positive way for sure. And so I'm glad that you've brought this bill forward, and I'm glad to hear this testimony. And I just want to reiterate that it's not just 5 big cities here that we're talking about. It's all of Connecticut that would benefit from the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for Mr. Williams? Seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. Now, Michael, you have the floor. Michael Piscatelli.
Thank you so much, Honorable Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Michael Piscatelli. I'm the Economic Development Administrator for the City of New Haven. Thank you so much for your ongoing support of our economic development program and for the opportunity today to provide additional testimony concerning SB 873 and in strong support of the tiered system for payments in lieu of taxes. We've submitted written testimony, which I'll paraphrase for you just on the basis of time today. As you know from the mayor and the many other people who have testified today, there is a real urgent need to stabilize the municipal finances here in the city of New Haven and elsewhere. It is very important from a social justice and an equity perspective. Approximately 27% of our population resides below the poverty line. And in part due to the pandemic, we have about 5,700 residents who are applying on a continuing basis every week for the unemployment, the supplemental unemployment benefits, to give you a sense for the need. Lifting our residents out of poverty and providing access to jobs in a recovering economy is going to be at the very heart of our mission going forward. And as part of your deliberations today, I encourage you to consider some of the economic factors as they relate to municipal finance and strong local governance, and I'll give you some observations in that regard. First, you heard quite a bit about the economic engine of New Haven and the power of Yale University and Yale New Haven Health. What's behind that in many respects is the knowledge and technology transfer coming out of Yale, the increasing national prominence of Yale New Haven Health, and how that's developing an ecosystem and an economic engine around key economic sectors that are very important for the state of Connecticut. Quite frankly, that scientific brilliance is driving growth in quantum, the biosciences, and a number of social impact technologies here in New Haven and then spinning out across the state. Even through the pandemic, many sectors here in New Haven have been growing. We issued over 750 housing permits last year. Over 40 new businesses opened in the city last year, and we continue with a very robust economic infrastructure program, thanks with your support to the continuing removal of Route 34, opening up land for new development, and then a number of coastal resiliency projects that will stabilize and help grow a district like Long Wharf, which supports over 5,000 jobs here in the city. This recovery, however, is going to be completely dependent on a value of place. You heard previously about the need to support public services like police and fire, core public services, DPW. It's also about strong neighborhoods, affordable housing for all of our residents, and quality education. To give you some examples in that regard, we also support things like the BioPath program at Southern Connecticut State University. That creates access for New Haven public school students to many of the new jobs coming to New Haven in the biosciences. We do similar work in small contractor, a cultural equity space, and neighborhood commercial districts. This is all part of that ground game that we focus on quite a bit in order to build a stronger ecosystem and attract the talent and the investment here to New Haven and to Connecticut. With that in mind, our team here at the city, all of our departments are deeply committed to the Connecticut comeback. We ask for your support to stabilize our finances such that that can continue. Happy to answer any questions that you might have in that regard. And thank you again for your support of our residents and business community.
Thank you, Mr. Piscatelli, for your testimony here today. And Senator Martin has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Michael. Thank you for coming and testifying. I meant to ask Mayor Elicker, maybe you could answer this, is regarding Yale, how much do they, in addition to, I guess, how much does Yale specifically give to the city of New Haven in its budget?
So I think, it's a difficult to answer in just one sentence or word. We can provide you some backup on that. I think Rich Jacob from the university provided more detail on their specific contributions. One thing I might add to that conversation is Yale also leases quite a bit of space in New Haven. So property like 25 Science Park, for example, which might be a $20 million value to our grant list, is largely driven by private lease space that Yale does in the community. So there's a couple of different layers to those contributions, and it speaks to the strong ecosystem and tech transfer.
So are those leases, are they paying their taxes to the city? Or is Yale not paying taxes on those leases?
You would see that appear in the grant list under the property owner. So there are a number of property owners in the city that have, Yale leasehold, lessees in their building, and that's how it shows up on the grant list.
So you just testified regarding the ecosystem that Yale is producing in its area, and it seems to contradict the budget, the deficits that the city has. So I'm just baffled a little bit by that. If we're doing so well regarding developing that ecosystem, why is it, I hear the 60% of the properties being non-taxable. I get that. So I guess I'm going to just ask one other question, and I asked it previously. Do you feel that we should be taxing, or Yale should be taxed and collecting money from them?
Let me answer the first part of your question first, because I think it's important, and it creates, when you compared it to Yale's growth relative to the municipal finances, it's one of the most unfortunate conversations we have to have around New Haven. If you look at a project like Yale SOM, which is a landmark building, an architectural treasure, we might go through the land use approval process, and half that testimony is about will it contribute to the tax base. What it's contributing to the overall economic well-being of Connecticut in so many respects. And it gets reduced to that sort of low common denominator because we have to pay for police and fire, maintain strong communities, and do it on, sort of a limited grant list basis, if you will. The second part is a more theoretical question, I think, better answered by the mayor and the staff at, and the electeds, if you will. What I would convey to you a little bit is the urgency of it. We are at a great moment economically here in Connecticut and in New Haven. And if we miss the moment because we can't stabilize ourselves financially, we will have, foregone a great opportunity to capture some of the tech transfer that's coming out of the university today. So the question you ask could be 5, 10 years down the road to figure it out. It's an urgent need to unlock the growth that's happening right now.
So you're saying the growth that's happening, so where is it going? Is it leaving the state? Is that what you're implying?
There are a number of studies that the university itself has done. We've looked at them to see, what we're able to retain tech transfer coming out that stays in Connecticut or might be pulled out to larger places like Boston or San Francisco. But more to the point, something like the neuroscience campus at Yale New Haven Health will be a great driver for our entire region. But again, because it's tax exempt, it gets caught up in this conversation, which is how do we stabilize ourselves?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator, very much. Any other questions? Oh, Representative Wood.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, the gentleman who just spoke. I do have a question for him, the Development Director of New Haven.
Please
and I think,
proceed.
yeah, I think Senator Martin just asked it, but what is your, when you said that you're worried about them leaving, you answered the question. Never mind. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a lot. It's a fascinating discussion. It's a long day, and I'm actually thoroughly enjoying and relishing this conversation. And again, most of us feel heartfelt about making sure our cities are made whole and that they remain vibrant and even build on that vibrancy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam. And I think for all of us that if we're sitting in a committee room, we have the phones. And if you ever watch where we sit in the back and you see how many phones are going, both in the committee, but also in the audience, it's amazing the ability to multitask that the brain has. And but it's even more distracting, I think, in this regard, because you could have a couple of meetings going on at once, and and maybe even a call going on at the same time. We have the ability to mute and do all kinds of things, or even go off screen for a little bit if we have to. Any other questions for Mr. Piscatelli? Thank you, sir, for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Representative Brian Lanou. Is Brian here? There he is.
I'm here, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. For the record, I am Brian Lanou, state representative from the 45th House District, comprising of 5 wonderful towns in eastern Connecticut, one of which is Voluntown. And I'm here along with First Selectman Tracy Henson to talk about SB 873. Voluntown, we're an anomaly. We're kind of an exception out here. 70% of the landmass in Voluntown is owned by the state of Connecticut. So we have a very limited ability to grow our grand list, our tax structure. There is a big demand on our first responders. So we want to make sure that the language that is in SB 873 will benefit and support Voluntown, and they get their fair share. So I'm committed to work with the members of the committee and First Selectman Henson to make sure we get the language right. And I want to hand over the camera to her so she can explain to you a little more about Voluntown and just how crucial the pilot funding is to this community. And here's our First Selectman Henson.
Hello. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, and distinguished members of the committee. As the first selectman of Voluntown, I am before you today in favor of Section 11 of SB 873, but with some revisions. Every year for the past 4 years, I have come before the legislature as first selectman before me have, to request an increase in the pilot funding for the town of Voluntown. Since SB 873 is a bill that changes the pilot reimbursement, I am here again to plead that Voluntown's unique situation be taken into consideration in the wording of this bill. Voluntown is a town that is small in population with just over 2,500, but large in size, covering 39.8 square miles. What is unique about Voluntown is that close to 70% of the land is owned by the state of Connecticut. This is recognized in the current and proposed pilot funding legislation and how we get our pilot funding when determining the pilot value. It is stated in Section 11, lines 566, 569 of the proposed bill, With respect to any municipality in which more than 50% of the property is state-owned real property, 100% of the property taxes that would have been paid with respect to such state-owned property. Over the years, the state of Connecticut has acquired more land in Voluntown, yet our pilot funding has remained the same or decreased. The state of Connecticut is the largest property owner in town, and it is not paying its fair share of property taxes, leaving the burden onto our other residents. This leaves a heavy burden. The state property borders town roads. Voluntown's first responders cover fire and rescue for the state land. We currently have no senior center, no recreation center, and no in-town social services. And we depend on Troop E in Montville to be our law enforcement. We don't have a resident trooper.
This is a 3-minute warning.
Okay. So we do take pride in our schools, and our residents have made the decision to spend their property taxes on our school. So we are beneficial to have a good school system, but all of the other social services in town we do not have. Voluntown currently receives a total of $174,436 in pilot funding. Of this, $119,254 are from state-owned real pilot, and we get $56,182 as college and hospital pilot. Now you're probably wondering, where is there a college or hospital in Voluntown? Well, there is not. Thanks to former Representative Steve Micatel, we have been receiving that as an addition for what we're not getting from our state-owned pilot. This is based on $486,480 that were statutorily owed. So I am requesting that the committee take a few revisions into consideration. First of all, much of the land that we have that is owned by the state of Connecticut is not assessed at full value. It is in fact assessed at PA 490 value, which is considerably less. So this is affecting our total of assessed value of all the land in Voluntown. Not to mention that what we're talking about here is land and not the buildings like are in the city. So the assessed value is automatically going to be way different than that of the cities. I'm also requesting that the committee take
Tracy, could you summarize your testimony, please?
Yep, I'm also requesting that the bill be amended or added that all municipalities in which more than 50% is state-owned be reimbursed at least 50%. And that's all, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Before Representative Cheeseman has her question, I will say this is a first to see. Often in committee, we will see a legislator bringing up maybe it's a first selectman, maybe it's a mayor, maybe it's a constituent of some kind or another. But this is a first on Zoom on this committee anyway to see that. So creativity, no matter what, pandemic or otherwise, people will find a way.
We're making history, Mr. Chairman.
You are, sir. You
making
are.
history in Voluntown.
Unfortunately, you're probably going to find others finding an equally creative way to. But the good thing is we have a lottery system here, and you abided by that, and we appreciate it. And hopefully this will give people an ability to go about their day knowing that they'll probably be testifying at a relatively certain time. That's our goal. And they don't have to sit in the room all day waiting from 10 in the morning until 10 at night or what have you. So thank you. Representative Cheeseman.
Quick question. So, and if you can help me with this, what tier would you be falling in under the new system?
We would fall into the second tier, but I have to say, I from OPM, I received a list of the proposed funding for the tiers, and the list, Voluntown on that list does not show the college and hospital pilot funding that we receive. It only shows the state-owned property. So according to the funding that we would receive being in tier 2, according to the chart, it looks like we're getting an additional 75,000, but that doesn't take into account the 56,000 that we're going to be losing from pilot. So we're only having an additional 20,000, which is good because it's not a loss, but it still doesn't make up for the loss of the tax. And also, we don't have any way to grow our grand list because 70% of the town is a lot. We don't have room to put businesses or anything. So.
Okay, and what's your current mill rate?
Our current mill rate is 29.21. But like I mentioned before, our budget is about $8 million. 6 to 7 million of that goes directly to the school. So that leaves us just over $1 million that runs our government. So that's where we're having a hard time right now, is in order to add a resident trooper, in order to add the services that we need for our aging community, which are, we don't have any senior services, or we don't have transportation. These are all things that we need that we haven't been adding because it's going to increase our mill rate drastically. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, madam. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And for those folks hanging in there, there are 3 more that we have on our list to testify. So the end is in sight. John Lee, is John with us?
Yep, I'm right here.
Great.
Thank you. So my name's John Lee. I live in New Haven. I work for the education nonprofit LEAP, and I organize with New Haven Rising. Today I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 873. While I'm proud to call New Haven my home, our city is deeply divided, unequal, and underfunded. A lot of people spoke to that. Our problems are complex, but the simple truth is we need a sufficient budget to make meaningful structural change and reverse decades of segregated development. Our city is at a breaking point. We face declining pilot reimbursement and increasing non-taxable property owned by Yale University and Yale New Haven Hospital. A lot of people have spoken to that. So I just want to address what this means for our children. Last week, I went on a walk with Assad. He's a high school junior joining our LEAP family as a counselor. He told me he wants to be a therapist in New Haven. When I told Assad about the cultural stigma of therapy in my own family, his eyes lit up. He shared his aspiration to normalize therapy and conversations around mental health for young Black men in his communities. But Assad confessed how lonely that aspiration felt. He said there just aren't nearly enough mental health resources in our schools and communities. Assad is 16 years old, and he wants a revitalized New Haven. He sees his place in it. But for the vast majority of youth I speak to, this is actually not the case. When I ask counselors about the goals they have for our 6 to 12-year-olds, counselors regularly cite education as an opportunity for our kids and themselves to get out, to escape New Haven, or to go elsewhere. For me, this is deeply frustrating when I reflect that New Haven is actually the first place I've ever experienced the sense of belonging and identity attached to a place. And this is after graduating from Yale, not as a student. My grandparents fled North Korea as orphans during the Korean War, and my parents immigrated and found safe but insular communities across the states. In New Haven, I found community members who have welcomed me into their own families, cared for me, and cultivated my moral spirit. Some of these families are on the call now. The fact that many of these families' children live in such scarcity that they have already rejected their own communities as viable future homes at such a young age is wrong and unacceptable, and speaks to scarcity in education in so many of our what should be abundantly funded public programs. Real revitalization in New Haven and communities across the state is possible, and obviously our youth deserve it. This will take time, commitment, innovation, but fundamentally investment. So I support this more equitable solution to pilot funding, and I also continue to call out Yale loudly to pay their taxes. Daily, our children are losing critical opportunities to learn, develop into the leaders their communities need them to be, and also just be kids. I urge the members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee who are truly committed to meaningful change, equity, and a sustainable future for all to pass this bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Christopher Smith. Is Christopher here? Christopher.
Yes, sir,
there he
I'm
is.
here.
Okay.
So I own a couple of properties in New Haven, and I manage quite a few more. And I've seen a lot of people suffering, and a lot of homeowners suffering and myself included. I pay $18,000 a year on a 3-family house. It's astronomical. And to see a conglomerate like Yale not paying any tax on, I mean, I heard someone previously stating that they're leasing some property, which, I mean, I'm sure that does contribute, and that's great. But overall, with a 60% of the city is such a dramatic amount that it leaves the rest of us making up the difference. And it's completely unfair. And you know, myself, yes, I own a business, but I'm you know, my aunt lives in the first floor of that house for free, and she's been living there for her whole life. It's 4 generations my family's had that house. So, you know, I get 2 rents for income on a 3-family house. If the taxes were to go any higher, I would be losing money, literally. So it's just completely unfair to New Haven residents to be paying this much tax just to support Yale. I mean, not that they don't bring anything to the table, because they absolutely do. My fiance works there. Her mother works there. They're both nurses. My aunt used to work there as a nurse. You know, they definitely bring a lot to the community, but nobody's saying pay 100% of the tax that up for the property that you obtain, but something to contribute to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I hope I'm pronouncing your first name correctly, Sana Shah.
Dear Senator Fanfara, Representative Scanlon, and esteemed members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Sana Shah, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Connecticut Voices for Children. In consideration of time, I'm reading a truncated version of our submitted testimony. We are testifying in support of Senate Bill 873. This testimony is focused on 2 components of the legislation. First, the removal of liens on the property of public assistance beneficiaries, and second, a 3-tiered grant in lieu of taxes program. First, we support ending the practice of placing liens on the property of public assistance beneficiaries, often described as the poverty tax. Connecticut's poverty tax contributes to the inequities faced by people of color and low-income families. Ending this practice is the just and moral thing to do. Opponents of this bill will argue that the revenue from liens is necessary to balance the state's budget. But relying on the most marginalized Connecticut residents for revenue is unjust and regressive. Further, collecting liens does not provide substantial revenue for the state. Data from the past 5 years found that 1,300 state welfare liens placed on homes with an average lien totaling $14,000. Repealing this bill would cost the state $18.3 million annually, only 0.1% of the state's yearly revenue. Additionally, only Connecticut and New York State place liens on property for cash assistance programs, and in 40 years, more than 30 states have repealed laws that place liens on property of public assistance recipients. Generating revenue on the backs of low-income families treats poverty as a personal failing rather than a reflection of structural inequities that harm our state's most marginalized. Ending the practice of placing liens on real estate and unanticipated income helps families living in poverty build the wealth they need to reach self-sufficiency and to create opportunities for upward mobility for their children. We applaud this important step and advocate to further expand the language in this bill to mitigate the impacts of benefit cliffs in Connecticut, another practice that can create heavy burden and unjust debts for hardworking families. Benefits cliffs refer to the situations when an increase in family income leads to an abrupt and burdensome change in the amount of money a family must contribute to pay for necessities received through public benefit programs. or in the discontinuation of a family being able to access a public benefit program altogether. Taking action now to smooth benefits cliffs will help families meet their needs now and in years to come as the minimum wage increases and new cliffs are created. This week, we will publish a report modeling the impact of benefits cliffs on the state and email it to members of this committee and post it on our website. The report details 10 recommendations to help mitigate the impending benefits cliffs. The full-length testimony we submitted for today also includes an outline of these recommendations. Second, we support implementing a 3-tiered grants in lieu of taxes program. A tiered pilot program is one mechanism to support our urban centers and the state's economy. Such a program would provide an avenue for property tax relief to residents in these communities, and the freed up resources allow for more opportunities for children and families. Thus, Connecticut Voices for Children urges the committee to pass Senate Bill 873, the removal of liens, the property of public assistance beneficiaries, and 3-tiered grants in lieu of taxes program will advance equity for Connecticut's low-income families and residents of color. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. I see some questions. Senator Martin.
Thank you. I only have one. Thank you, Sana, for testifying. So if we, regarding the lien specifically, if we prohibit those liens from taking place and the beneficiary of whatever, lawsuit financially that they gain, would most of these individuals get off of public assistance?
Can you say more, please?
Yeah, so, this lien, is by DAS, and if, a lot of individuals are receiving state benefits or some type of public assistance, and the purpose of the lien is, from what I understand, is should they come into any type of financial gain, that the state is able to garnish those funds, so to speak, correct? And if we remove that ability for DAS to do that, would a lot of these those that are receiving public assistance be able to get off public assistance?
So Connecticut is only 2 of the states that currently place liens on this property based on people who are beneficiaries in the past. And I think there was a woman who testified earlier about how this was actually accidental, and it was something that was overlooked decades ago, this particular practice. And so what we're advocating for is repealing this, because after people are now able to purchase property and gain wealth, they shouldn't be penalized for public assistance that they've had in the past. So this is a way of families being able to grow their wealth and move out of public assistance.
I understand that, and I think that's the goal of what we should have, right? Is to help those that are receiving public assistance today, is to get them to a point where they would no longer need that assistance. But that seems to be the rub, is that many are a little hesitant of getting off public assistance or because of the benefits that they do have, and don't take a job because of it. And I'm just curious, if we repeal this, would this help remove individuals from the public assistance? Because the goal is really to get them into the workforce. So I guess it's a rhetorical question, so no need to, unless you want to reply. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that, families would like to be in a situation where they're not economically vulnerable, and they're able to have safety nets, and they don't have to tap into these benefits, right? Like, families want to be able to have basic necessities. They want to be able to grow. They want to feel security. And so I don't think that this is something that would deter families from, leaving public assistance. I think that this is just something that helps people have economic security and continuously have that.
Thank you, Sana, for testifying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today, Sana. One, I am eagerly awaiting your report on the benefits cliff, because I know this is something of great concern to both on a bipartisan basis. My members have wanted to discuss this, so I will look for that with interest. Again, you weighed in on the liens. Can you comment, does Connecticut Voices on Children, because I know you have very specific proposals with regard to how we conduct taxation in the state, have any position on the original purpose of this bill, which was looking at how we tax remote workers and reciprocity?
We haven't done particular research on that, but when looking at this bill, we understand that this is important in advancing economic justice.
Okay, thank you. I'd be interested if you look at this further in terms of how we tax workers and the reciprocity with other states, if you have any input on that. So thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Sana, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. I'll make sure to speak to our experts and circle back with you with some data and feedback.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. Representative Farrar.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Hi, Sana. Thank you for being here and for all the research. A quick question. I think actually it might get a little bit at what Senator Martin was mentioning. I know the report isn't out yet, but can you kind of clarify how the benefits cliffs particularly kind of work into this issue of welfare liens? Because I do think that part of what we're trying to achieve is to diminish the benefits cliffs that are happening. So can you kind of clarify how that would work if we got rid of the welfare lien?
So the reason why I mention extending this legislation to include the mitigation of this cliff effect is because this has to do with families being in debt. And, our goal, of course, is to support families and children and having all the economic resources that they need. And, Senator Martin did bring up a point about, families sometimes not being, in order to receive benefits, not taking certain kinds of opportunities because they no longer will be able to access those benefits. And so that is something that we're going to be facing in Connecticut. And so it is absolutely important to raise the minimum wage to also, speed up that process. But most importantly, we have to look at the cliff effects in this. And so making sure that families who still need public assistance are being able to access that. And so our report will highlight all the recommendations regarding that. I will say that I know that this is something that a bill that is being addressed in different committees today. And so our expert on benefits cliffs is actually testifying at the other committee. So if you have any more questions, I can always circle back with her and send an email.
Thank you, Sana, for that. And I don't know if you all have any perspective on the elements of the bill. I think it was brought up in a few testimonies earlier today about the language about it being a lien filed on any property valued at $250,000 or less. And it seems that other states didn't have that qualification. So I was curious what you all have found in your research in that regard.
With other states and what the liens have. So yeah. I don't have that particular research on me right now, but again, that is something that I can look into with our experts and get that data to you.
That would be super helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I see no further questions for Ms. Shaw. And that ends our list of folks interested in testifying today. So thank you all very much. Thank you to those that testified. Thank you to the members and to Representative Scanlon for taking the helm for most of this hearing. He's been called to another meeting, I understand. And I just want to say that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And what I mean by that is, as chair of the committee, I get to observe, for better or for worse, those that who start the meeting and who ends the meetings. And I have to say that the same folks generally who stay throughout the meetings are here again today, staying throughout this hearing. So thank you, folks, for being so committed to hearing all the testimony that comes before us. And I just want to say also that to the new members, I see a few new members have hung in there today as well. So lastly, I'm being told by our committee administrator that tomorrow at 11, Tom, is that right? We will be voting concepts.
Yes, correct.
It is our last meeting to raise concepts. We still have more time with respect to proposed bills, but with
Correct.
concepts tomorrow is our deadline. So I hope you all can make that. And that will be by Zoom as well. Any questions?
No, I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, thanks to you and Representative Scanlon, and also to our great staff. This was our first public hearing. I know there are a lot of balls to keep in the air, and I think all of you handled it remarkably well. And let's hope it continues this way in the future. I have infinite faith in you, so I'm sure it will.
Yeah, just to say that I think everybody knows the way we did this with respect to the lottery. I felt and still feel that trying to provide equal access, whether you're a legislator, whether you're a municipal official, a state part of the administration, or you know, with an organization, whatever your status, just someone, as we had today, folks from the community, that everybody get an equal shot at all of you. But very often, today's an exception, there are still a lot of folks here, but very often there's a handful of folks left to speak to if you're a witness that, you know, 8 o'clock at night or whatever. But everybody should have an equal shot at speaking and being heard by as many of you as possible. And I appreciate your attendance, and hopefully we can continue this approach. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll be seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.